There are places in the jungle where maps don't show and where people never return. We slept next to one of them. I never used to be the kind of man who believed that the mountains could whisper. Growing up in Ohio, the tallest things around me were water towers and church steeples. When I bought my first RV in my late 30s, it was supposed to be about freedom, escaping the repetition of office walls, motel carpets, and the kind of tired suburban conversations where every man measured himself against the size of his lawnmower or the height of his fence. I thought camping would clear my head, give me time to breathe again. But I've come to understand that freedom isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's a door you open without realizing what waits behind it. It was in Colorado that winter, the trip that has stayed with me, the one that still wakes me up at night, sweating even years later. I had been driving west in my RV, just me and my black lab, Scout. The plan was simple: a few weeks off work, some nights parked near remote trailheads, maybe a little hiking before the heavy snow settled in. I had read about a primitive campground tucked high in the San Juan Mountains, not far from a narrow valley where avalanches were common enough that locals named them like storms. I don't know why that didn't scare me off. Maybe it was arrogance, or maybe I just didn't believe that the mountain could turn against me. The day I arrived, the air was thin enough that every breath felt like it carried weight. My RV groaned on the final climb, the tires crunching over packed snow that hadn't been plowed in days. When I pulled into the campground, I realized I was alone, just me, a wide circle of empty spaces, and the mountain walls climbing like frozen waves on every side. There was a sign posted near the entrance, its letters faded and bullet-pocked, warning campers about sudden avalanches, unstable ice, and unexplained disturbances. I almost laughed when I read that last part, disturbances, as if the mountain were haunted. I chalked it up to locals trying to spook tourists into staying in town. But by the second night, I wasn't laughing. The first thing I noticed was the silence. At lower elevations, even in winter, there are always sounds. Branches cracking, animals shifting in the brush, wind moving like a restless hand through the trees. But here the silence pressed against me, heavy and deliberate, as if it were listening instead of speaking. Scout seemed restless, pacing near the RV door, his ears twitching at things I couldn't hear. That first night, as I tried to sleep, I thought I caught something beneath the stillness. A low rumble, deep, like distant thunder, muffled by snow. I told myself it was just the shifting of ice on the ridges. The next morning, I hiked a little beyond the campground, up toward the base of one of those ridges. The snow was powdery, fresh from a light storm the day before, and the air was so crisp it stung my teeth. As I climbed, I kept hearing a strange echo. Every crunch of my boots seemed to come back to me twice, not just once, as though the mountains were repeating the sound, almost testing it. When I paused, the echoes lingered too long, fading slower than they should have. It unnerved me enough that I cut the hike short and returned to the RV. That night, it grew worse. I woke up around 2 a.m, the kind of waking where you don't know why you're awake until you realize something is wrong. Scout was growling low, standing at the window, his tail stiff. I held my breath and listened, and that's when I heard it, a voice. Not loud, not clear, but threaded through the dark like a needle through cloth. It carried the same weight as the rumble I'd heard before, deep and slow, but it wasn't thunder. It was my name. I froze there in my bed, staring at the ceiling of the RV, and the voice seemed to roll down from the ridge above, carried not by wind, but by something older, heavier. Ethan, it wasn't shouted. It wasn't whispered. It was spoken with a terrible patience, as though the mountain had been waiting for me. I told myself I was imagining it, some half-dream, tangled with the groaning of ice in the cliffs. But Scout wouldn't move from the window, wouldn't stop that low, terrified growl. When I finally got the courage to peek outside, the night was sharp with starlight, every tree branch crusted with frost. Nothing moved. but I swear I felt the snow beneath me shift, just a tremor like the earth clearing its throat. The next morning, I thought about leaving. Rationally, I should have, but something kept me there. Part of it was stubbornness. Part of it was the quiet pull of curiosity. When you hear your name spoken in a place where no one else exists, it hooks into you. You want to prove it was nothing, or you want to prove it was real. Either way, you stay until you find out. That day was colder. The wind had picked up, whipping down the valley, making the snow hiss across the frozen ground. I spent most of it inside the RV, drinking instant coffee, trying to distract myself with an old paperback I had read 3 times before. But in every pause between the gusts, I swore I could still hear that deep rumble, the edge of a word caught in the snow. By evening, I'd convinced myself it was nothing more than my imagination, mixed with the fear of being isolated. I cooked a can of chili, fed Scout, and turned in early. But the mountain had other plans. At first, I thought it was just wind rattling the RV walls, but then came the knock. Sharp, measured, not on the door, not on the windows, but on the side of the RV itself. 3 times. Then silence. My breath caught in my throat. Scout barked, leaping toward the door, but when I flicked on the exterior light, there was nothing. Just snow blowing sideways. I told myself it had to be ice falling from the branches above, or maybe a tree shifting against the side, but deep down I knew the sound. That was no accident. Someone, or something, had knocked. And as I lay back down, heart pounding, trying to convince myself I was safe, the voice came again, rolling down the ridge like thunder, but forming syllables too deliberate to be anything but language. Ethan. This time it was closer. The sound didn't fade the way thunder fades. It lingered, like it was waiting for me to answer. I pressed my palm flat against the RV wall, as if I could feel the vibration of it traveling through the frame. Scout's barking turned frantic, his nails scratching against the linoleum, tail stiff like a rod. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I realized something unsettling. Scout wasn't barking at the door anymore. He was barking at the ceiling. I looked up. Nothing but the thin roof of the RV separated me from the stars and the snow. But the way he growled, the way his eyes locked on one spot above us, made me feel as though something was crouching there, just out of sight, waiting for me to step outside. I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed my flashlight and sat on the edge of my bed, every muscle tense. Minutes passed, long, suffocating minutes where I heard nothing but the wind and Scout's low growl. Finally, the silence returned, but it didn't bring peace with it. It brought that same awful pressure, as though the quiet itself was listening. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When morning came, I stepped outside with shaky legs, forcing myself to inspect the RV. I half expected to see claw marks or dents where someone had knocked. But the snow was untouched. No prints, no trails, not even the slight depression of weight against the powder. The side of the RV was clean, as if no hand had ever touched it. That should have been the moment I left. Rationality screamed at me to drive down the mountain while daylight was still on my side. But leaving would mean I'd admit I was scared, that I couldn't handle being alone in the wild. So I told myself what every stubborn man tells himself when his gut says run. You're imagining things. You're tired. You'll feel better tonight. I didn't. That evening, the cold deepened, a sharp bite that seeped through every seam of the RV. I doubled up on blankets, tried to distract myself with music, anything to block out the silence. But no song lasted long enough. No distraction was deep enough. Because every time there was a pause, I felt it. The mountain leaning close, listening. It was around midnight when I heard the second knock. Not 3 this time, just 1. A heavy thud, deliberate, near the back of the RV. I grabbed the flashlight, swung it toward the window, but the snowstorm outside made everything blur and bend. Scout barked again, but this time his bark broke into a whimper, tail tucked. He retreated under the table, shivering, refusing to come back out. That's when the voice came again. Ethan. The sound rattled in my chest like it came from inside me instead of outside. My name carried weight, pressed into every syllable, vibrating through the glass, the metal, the very snow outside. I shut my eyes tight, clutching the flashlight like a weapon, whispering to myself that it wasn't real, that I was dreaming, that I was losing my mind. But the mountain didn't stop. The rumble deepened, rolling from ridge to ridge, carrying the name again and again until it seemed like the entire valley was speaking it, echoing it back to me. Ethan, Ethan, Ethan. The sound swelled like an avalanche, growing, pressing until I thought the RV itself might crack under it. And then, silence. Sudden, total. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed, waiting for it to come again. My body felt heavy, like the air itself had thickened, refusing to let me move. When sleep finally came, it wasn't sleep at all. It was a blackout. The next morning, I stumbled outside, desperate to prove to myself that something tangible had happened, that I wasn't losing my mind. I circled the RV, searched the snow, scanned the ridges. At first, there was nothing. But then, near the tree line, I saw it. Something that didn't belong. Footprints. They weren't animal prints. They weren't snowshoe prints either. They were bare. Human. 10 distinct toes, pressed deep into the powder, leading away from the RV and vanishing into the forest. My stomach dropped. The temperature that night had been near zero. No one could walk barefoot in that cold and survive. And yet the tracks were there. I followed them a few steps before stopping. The prints didn't sink the way mine did. They were pressed into the surface, yes, but the snow beneath hadn't collapsed under weight. It was as if the snow had agreed to hold their shape, untouched by gravity. I backed away, heart hammering, and forced myself inside the RV. All that day I stayed locked in, blinds drawn, the heater cranked until it whined. Scout wouldn't leave my side. Every little creak of the RV frame made me jump. Every sigh of the wind sounded like words I couldn't quite make out. I kept telling myself, one more night, just one more, and then you leave. But the mountain had been patient long before I arrived. That night, it didn't knock. It didn't whisper. It roared. The sound started low, like a far-off avalanche, but instead of rushing down the slopes, it swelled upward as if the mountain were inhaling. Then the voice thundered my name with such force the RV shook, the dishes rattling in their cabinets, Scout yelping in terror. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the sound didn't lessen. It was inside me, vibrating my bones, my blood, my thoughts. And then through the storm of noise, something new emerged. Not just my name. Come out. 2 words. Simple. Commanding. Spoken not like a suggestion, but like inevitability. I don't know what possessed me, but I grabbed my coat, pulled Scout's leash, and flung open the RV door. The storm had died. The sky was bare, black, choked with stars. The valley spread quiet and empty, the snow glistening under moonlight. But on the slope above, just at the tree line, I saw a figure. It was too far to make out clearly, but it stood still, tall and narrow, its skin pale against the dark trees. And though it didn't move, though it didn't lift a hand or take a step, the voice rolled down toward me all the same. Ethan. My grip on the leash faltered. Scout pulled back, whining, refusing to go closer. My instincts screamed at me to run inside, to slam the door, to drive as far from this place as the engine could take me, but I stood frozen, unable to turn away. Because in that moment, I realized something worse than being hunted. The voice that had been calling my name, it wasn't a stranger's voice. It was mine. Hearing your own voice echo back at you from the mountains is a kind of madness I can't put into words. It wasn't just the sound of me, it was the weight behind it, the shape of it, the way it carried, as if the mountain had swallowed me whole and was speaking with my lungs. I stumbled backward into the RV, dragging Scout with me, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow, like I'd just run a mile at altitude. For long minutes, I didn't move, just stood there with my back pressed against the door, flashlight in one hand, my other hand gripping Scout's collar. His eyes were wide, frantic, looking to me for something I didn't have, reassurance, but I had nothing to give him. The voice didn't come again that night, at least not in words. Instead, the silence thickened. It wasn't a natural quiet. It was the kind that seeped under your skin and spread cold through your bones. I crawled back into bed, shivering under 3 blankets, every nerve raw, and eventually slipped into a kind of half-sleep. That's when the dreams began. I was standing in the middle of the valley, snow swirling around me in blinding spirals. The mountains loomed higher than they should have, their ridges curling inward, bending like shoulders leaning close. And through the wind I heard the avalanche begin, not of snow but of voices. Thousands, maybe millions, tumbling together, overlapping until they became one, my own voice leading them. Come out. I woke with a cry, drenched in sweat despite the cold, and the terrible truth settled in my stomach. It wasn't just the mountain calling me. It was something inside me answering. The next morning I tried to pack up. I shoved everything into cupboards, disconnected the hoses, preheated the engine. My hands shook so badly I kept dropping things. Scout whined by the door, eager, desperate to leave. But when I turned the ignition, the RV coughed, sputtered, and died. Battery dead. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the frozen windshield. The irony wasn't lost on me. Months of planning, thousands of dollars in equipment, and what stopped me from escaping wasn't the mountain or the snow. It was my own negligence, forgetting to check the damn battery before settling in. I told myself I'd hike down, 30 miles to the nearest town. I'd make it in a couple of days with enough food and water. But the thought of walking that road alone, with the ridges pressing in from both sides, with that voice echoing down into me, I couldn't do it. Not yet. So I waited. Another night. And that night, everything changed. It began with the tapping. Not on the side of the RV this time, but on the windows. Light, delicate, like fingernails brushing glass. I froze, every muscle tight, watching the curtains tremble as though someone or something was running its hand along them. Scout whimpered, pressed flat against the floor. Then came the shadow. It moved across the window, tall and narrow, blotting out the moonlight. For an instant it paused, and though I couldn't see its face, I felt its attention lock onto me. The pressure of it was unbearable, like being held under deep water. My chest ached with the effort of not breathing too loud. The shadow lingered, then passed, but the knocking resumed, louder this time, circling the RV. Every wall, every window, as if testing the shell I had built around myself. And then, again, the voice. But not just outside. Inside. Ethan. It came from the kitchen, then the bathroom, then the ceiling. Everywhere at once. My own voice, echoing in tones so deep they rattled the frame. I snapped, grabbed the flashlight, yanked the door open, and shouted into the night. What do you want from me? The valley swallowed my words, threw them back in ragged fragments. For a heartbeat, nothing answered. Then, from the slope above, the snow shifted. A long crack echoed like thunder, and I saw it, an avalanche breaking loose. I froze, paralyzed, watching tons of snow tear free from the ridge, a white wall surging downward. My mind screamed at me to run, to dive inside, to do anything but stand there. Yet I couldn't move, because woven through the roar of collapsing snow, I heard it again. My name. Not once, not twice, dozens of times. 1,000 times. My own voice braided into the sound of destruction, calling me upward instead of away. And here's the worst part. I almost went. For a moment, my legs twitched forward, my body ready to climb into the path of death as though it were destiny. But Scout lunged, teeth clamped onto my sleeve, yanking me back with a ferocity I'd never seen in him. His growl wasn't fear anymore. It was rage, defiance, like he was fighting the mountain itself for me. That broke the spell. I stumbled back inside just as the avalanche thundered into the valley below, stopping short of the campground but filling the air with a choking cloud of snow and ice. The RV shook under the force of it, windows rattling, cupboards spilling open. When it ended, silence returned, but not the natural kind, the heavy, listening silence. The mountain had called me, and I had almost answered. The next day, I didn't try to leave, didn't try to pack. I sat inside, hollow, replaying the moment over and over, the way my own voice had mingled with the roar, the way my body had wanted to obey. It wasn't just calling me anymore, it was inside me. That night, the dreams returned. I saw myself standing on the ridge, barefoot, skin pale, eyes hollow. I wasn't looking down at the RV, I was looking out into the endless snowfields, whispering into the storm. My mouth moved and the mountain moved with it. Together, we called another name. Not mine this time, someone else's. A man I'd never met, a stranger. And yet, when he turned his head, I knew him. I woke with ice on my lips, and when I checked the snow outside the RV that morning, there were footprints again. Only this time, they didn't lead away. They led directly to my door. Bare, human, and identical to mine. I stared at the footprints until my vision blurred, breath steaming in the brittle air. 10 toes pressed sharp into the snow. The same arch, the same narrow heel. My feet, my exact feet. Scout whined behind me, scratching at the door, desperate to get back inside. But I couldn't move yet. The prints didn't just stop at my RV door. They overlapped, pacing back and forth, as if I had been standing out here for hours, circling my own shelter, waiting for myself to answer. I knelt down, touched the nearest impression. The snow should have crumbled, collapsed under my glove. Instead, it was hard as glass, the edges sharp, as though time itself had frozen to preserve it. My stomach churned. This wasn't just something walking in my shape. It was me, or the shadow of me, left behind in ice. I stumbled back inside, slammed the door, and locked it, though I knew locks meant nothing against a mountain. Scout pressed against my leg, trembling so hard I could feel it in my bones. All day I paced the RV, running through explanations. Hallucination, hypothermia, sleepwalking. God, maybe I'd lost it and actually walked barefoot through the snow without remembering. But the prints had been perfect, too perfect. Not softened by body heat, not shaped by weight, like a mold pressed into the skin of the earth. I thought about calling for help, but there was no signal this high up. The only radio I had was short range, good for a couple miles. It wouldn't matter. No one would come. Not soon enough. By evening, the sky turned bruised purple and dread coiled tighter in my chest. Scout hadn't left my side all day. He refused food. His eyes followed the door as if expecting it to open on its own. That night, the mountain grew bolder. It began with whispers. Not just one voice this time, but dozens, weaving together like a chorus in a language made of snow and stone. My name slipped between them, threaded like a needle through cloth, rising above the rest until it filled every corner of the RV. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voices weren't outside anymore. They were in my skull, vibrating the roots of my teeth, crawling down my spine. And then came the pounding. Not a knock, not delicate taps. Pounding, like fists slamming into the walls, the roof, the floor. The RV shook, dishes clattering out of cupboards, Scout howling in terror. I shouted back, screamed into the noise until my throat burned, but the voices only grew louder. Through the chaos, one voice rose above the rest, mine, deeper, distorted, stretched like it had been dragged through centuries. Ethan, come out. I don't remember deciding to move. One moment I was clutching the table, the next I was at the door, hand on the knob. My body acted on its own, a puppet straining toward its master. My chest heaved, my mind screaming, no, 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 while my muscles betrayed me. Scout saved me again. He lunged at my arm, teeth sinking into my sleeve, jerking me back so hard I slammed into the counter. Pain jolted through me, sharp enough to snap me out of whatever spell had hooked me. I collapsed onto the floor, clutching the dog against my chest, sobbing, whispering thank yous into his fur. The pounding stopped, the voices faded. Silence fell so sudden it rang in my ears. When I dared look outside, the valley was still. The snow glittered under a pale moon. Nothing moved. No shadows, no footprints, but I knew the mountain was waiting. The next morning, the silence felt worse. Not empty, but expectant, like the pause between inhale and exhale. I forced myself to eat something, though it tasted like ash in my mouth. Scout refused his food again. His ribs pressed sharper under his fur. He was fading, and I hated myself for dragging him into this. By midday, I made a decision. I couldn't wait anymore. If the RV wouldn't start, I would walk. Supplies or not. Signal or not. I packed a bag, strapped snowshoes to my boots, and leashed Scout. Every second felt like a countdown, like the walls were closing in. We stepped outside into air so cold it cut my lungs. I turned once to look back at the RV, its white shell nearly blending into the drifts, and whispered a prayer I didn't believe in. Then I started down the narrow road that wound through the valley. For the first mile, the only sound was the crunch of my snowshoes and Scout's paws. The silence pressed heavier with each step, as if the mountains leaned closer. I tried not to look at the ridges, but my eyes betrayed me, drawn upward to the jagged teeth of ice and stone looming on either side. That's when I realized the silence wasn't silence at all. There was a rhythm to it, subtle, like breath. The whole valley inhaling, holding, exhaling, and threaded through that rhythm, faint but unmistakable, was my name. Not spoken this time. Sung. A low melodic hum that seeped from the snow itself. I quickened my pace, heart pounding, forcing myself not to look back. The hum rose higher, swelling into a chorus that filled the air until it vibrated in my ribs. My legs burned with effort, every step a battle against the urge to stop, to turn, to answer. Then Scout froze. He planted his feet, ears pinned, growl rumbling low in his chest. I tugged the leash, urging him forward, but he wouldn't move. His eyes locked on the ridge above us. And there, outlined against the sky, I saw them. Figures. Dozens, maybe more. Standing shoulder to shoulder along the ridge, their shapes pale against the darkening clouds. Too far to see their faces, too still to be human. But I knew. They were me. Each figure had my shape, my stance, my outline, an army of selves carved from snow and shadow. And though they didn't move, their voices moved through the valley, my name layered over and over until the sound was unbearable. Ethan, Ethan, Ethan. My knees buckled. Scout barked, frantic, pulling at the leash, trying to drag me forward. But I couldn't. My eyes locked on the figures, hypnotized, because one of them stepped forward, and when it did, I felt my own body move with it. Not willingly. Not by choice. Like a mirror pulling me closer to the glass. I stumbled forward, snowshoes dragging, Scout yanking me back with desperate force. My chest convulsed with terror, my mind screaming to resist, but my legs obeyed another will. Every step the figure took on the ridge, I took on the valley floor. The leash snapped taut and taut, Scout throwing all his weight against me, teeth bared, growl ragged with fury. That jolt was enough to stop me short. I collapsed into the snow, gasping, clawing at the ground to anchor myself. Above, the figure stopped, tilted its head, and then in my own voice, it spoke words I will never forget. You were always meant to join us. The words sank into me like hooks, sharp and unshakable. You were always meant to join us. The figures on the ridge did not move, but their presence pressed down like the weight of a storm about to break. My chest tightened, breath coming shallow, and for a terrible moment I believed it. I believed I had come here not by chance or choice, but by invitation. Scout's growl broke the trance. He lunged, biting down on my sleeve again, pulling with such desperation that it nearly tore the fabric from my arm. The leash cut into my wrist, and the pain jolted me back into my body. I clutched at the snow, fingers digging deep until they went numb, anchoring myself in the earth, reminding myself I was flesh, not echo. Above, the figure tilted its head, studying me. Then another figure stepped forward, then another. Each movement echoed in my muscles, trying to drag me along. My jaw clenched as I resisted, veins burning with the effort, sweat freezing on my skin. No, I hissed. My own voice sounded fragile against the chorus. I'm not yours. The figures didn't answer. They didn't have to. Their silence was worse than their voices, an expectation, a certainty that sooner or later I would break. I forced myself to stand, legs trembling, snowshoes sinking deep. My only thought was forward. Keep walking, keep moving, no matter how heavy the air became. Scout barked, snapping at the air, his entire body straining toward the road ahead. Together we staggered forward, step by step, every inch feeling like a battle for my soul. The valley narrowed, the ridges pressing closer. The chorus of voices followed, shifting from my name to words I couldn't understand, syllables that felt older than the mountain itself. My ears rang with the sound, my skull aching, like something inside was being rewritten. And then The road ended. I stopped short, heart pounding. The map in my head, the one I had studied before leaving, told me the road continued for miles, winding down toward the nearest town. But in front of me there was nothing, just a wall of snow, smooth, untouched, stretching from ridge to ridge as if the world had folded shut. Panic clawed at me. I swung the flashlight over the drifts, searching for some sign of the road, some break in the wall. There was nothing. No tracks, no path, just white infinity. Behind me, the voices grew louder. Scout barked again, frantic, pulling toward the snow wall, his nose pressed to it, paws digging, whining like there was something beyond it he could sense. I dropped to my knees, clawed at the snow with my gloves. It wasn't natural. It was too dense, too hard, like carved ice. My nails cracked, my skin tore, and still it didn't give. The voices swelled, and I knew if I stayed here, they would take me. I turned, and my blood froze. The figures on the ridge were no longer distant. They were closer. Much closer. Dozens of them now stood along the slopes of the valley, some only yards away, their outlines sharp in the moonlight. Their bodies were wrong, longer than mine, thinner, stretched as if molded from shadow and frost. Yet every face I glimpsed was my own. One stepped forward, and I felt the pull again, my legs twitching against my will. Join us. The words slid through my skull like knives. I staggered, my knees buckling. Scout lunged at me again, snarling, trying to drag me back. His eyes blazed with a wildness I had never seen, as if he understood the stakes better than I did. I dropped the pack, dropped everything. Only one thought mattered: run. I tore at the snow wall with my body, throwing myself against it, clawing, kicking, screaming. And then, by some miracle, a crack gave way. A shaft of moonlight pierced through, revealing a narrow gap, barely wide enough for me to slip through. I shoved Scout first, his body wriggling into the passage, his whimpers echoing on the other side. Then, I forced myself through, scraping my shoulders, tearing my coat, lungs burning with panic. Behind me, the chorus rose to a deafening pitch, the figures pressing closer, their outlines blurring as they descended the slope. I burst out onto open snow. The world beyond the wall looked different. The valley stretched wider, the ridges farther apart, the air clearer. For a heartbeat, I thought I had escaped, stumbled back into reality. But when I turned to look behind me, the wall was gone. No barrier, no figures, just empty snow stretching back into darkness. Scout pressed against me, whining, licking my frozen hands. I hugged him tight, shaking with relief, but deep down I knew the mountain hadn't let me go. Not really. I forced myself to keep walking. The night stretched on, endless, every step heavier than the last. My mind replayed the words over and over. You were always meant to join us. What did it mean? Why me? Why here? By dawn, my body was failing. My legs dragged, lips cracked, lungs raw from the cold. Scout limped beside me, his paws raw, his belly dusted with ice. I don't remember falling, but I must have, because suddenly I was lying in the snow, staring up at the paling sky. And that's when I saw it. Carved into the ridge above me, letters stretched hundreds of feet wide, burned into the snow as if by fire. My name. Ethan. The world tilted, my stomach lurched. My name, written by the mountain itself. The letters shimmered, crumbling, sliding, and then the snow broke loose again. Another avalanche, larger, closer, roaring down toward me with unstoppable force. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't obey. Scout barked, circled me, tried to pull me up by the sleeve, but my body was frozen, rooted to the spot. The avalanche thundered closer, blotting out the sky, a wall of death consuming everything in its path. And through its roar, my own voice rose again, calling me home. The avalanche poured toward me like a living beast, a mountain unhinged, an ocean of white screaming its hunger. I had heard of avalanches described as soundless walls, but this one roared, a thunder that swallowed my heartbeat and filled the valley with a voice of its own. And threaded inside that roar, impossibly clear, was my name, over and over, pulled apart, stretched, and braided into the sound. Ethan. The snow peeled itself into syllables, curling and collapsing into the valley, and each time my name was uttered, it struck me like a blow to the chest. The mountain was not just falling, it was speaking. I tried to move, but my legs buckled again, muscles locking as though the sound itself had frozen me. Scout barked at the wall of snow, his body low, fur bristling, tail tucked so tight between his legs that he shook with terror. His eyes darted from me to the rushing tide, back again as if begging me to choose, to fight, to run, to do something. The avalanche was seconds away. My mind fractured. One part of me screamed to give up, to let it take me, because maybe that was what it wanted all along. Maybe the mountain wasn't punishing me, it was welcoming me. That thought came with a seductive weight. It would be easier. Easier to stop fighting. Easier to fall into the cold and let the voices that had been calling all night finally pull me under. But another part of me, raw and desperate, refused. I thought of the stories my grandfather used to tell me about mountains, that they were not just stone and snow, but judges. They tested you, weighed you, and revealed what you were made of. I could almost hear his voice now, overlapping with the roar. Don't let it claim you, Ethan. Don't give it your name. Scout made the decision for me. He lunged at my arm, teeth sinking into my jacket, dragging with such force that I toppled sideways. The snow just in front of me erupted as the edge of the avalanche struck. Ice and stone shattered across the ground where I had been lying. We ran, or rather, we stumbled, half swallowed already. Scout pulled harder than he ever had in his life, guiding me down the slope, weaving us between jagged trees that clawed up from the snow like skeleton hands. Behind us, the avalanche chewed the valley whole. Branches snapped, boulders shattered, the mountain bellowed. I could feel it gaining on us, cold wind shoving me forward as the tide closed in. Snow whipped across my face, stinging, blinding. My lungs tore with each breath, the cold scraping me raw from the inside out. A tree loomed. Scout veered left. I followed without thought, plunging into a narrow gully. The avalanche roared above, spilling over the lip, spraying white fury into the gap. For a moment it seemed the gully would fill and bury us, but instead the main body thundered past, charging down the valley like a freight train. We collapsed in the shadow of the rocks, buried in loose powder that fell like ash. My chest heaved, ribs aching, every breath a blade of ice. Scout pressed against me, trembling so hard I could feel it through my bones. His whines were high and thin, the sound of a creature who had glimpsed death and didn't know if it had truly passed. The world went quiet, not silent. The avalanche still echoed distantly, rumbling down toward the lower valley. But compared to the deafening roar seconds ago, the hush was unbearable. My ears rang. My heartbeat throbbed in my temples. And underneath it all, faint but undeniable, I still heard my name. Not shouted now, whispered. As if the mountain hadn't finished with me yet, I pressed my face into Scout's fur, inhaled the sharp musk of him, grounding myself in something real, something alive. But when I lifted my head, the gully around us had changed. At first, I thought it was just snow patterns, shadows, tricks of the light. But no, the walls of the gully were carved, not by wind, not by water, by hands, dozens of hands. Indentations lined the ice, pressed deep into the frozen earth as if countless bodies had clawed at it, tried to climb out only to be dragged back under. The grooves were fresh. Snow hadn't yet had the chance to soften their edges. My stomach turned to stone as my fingers traced one. Human-sized, deep enough to break nails, to rip flesh. Scout whined again, pressing closer to me, tail whipping like he wanted to be anywhere but here. I staggered to my feet. My legs screamed from the effort, but I forced them upright. There was no way I could stay in that gully, not with those marks, not with the whispers curling tighter in my skull. We climbed. Each step was torture, snow crumbling beneath us, rocks slick with ice. More than once I slipped and nearly slid back down, but Scout scrambled ahead, finding footholds, urging me on with sharp barks. Somehow, impossibly, we clawed our way out. The ridge spread before us, a barren plateau of snow and stone. The morning sun had begun to rise, its light cold and brittle, painting everything in shades of silver. For the first time in hours, I felt warmth on my face, faint as it was. But then I saw it. Far across the plateau, etched into the snow again, my name. Larger this time, miles wide, carved so deep revealed the dark rock beneath. The letters twisted across the land like a wound. And in that moment, I understood something terrible. The mountain wasn't just calling me. It wasn't just speaking my name. It was writing me into itself, claiming me, letter by letter, as though I were not a person at all, but a story it intended to keep. I dropped to my knees, the weight of it crushing me. My breath came ragged, my vision blurring with tears I hadn't felt coming. I wanted to scream, but no sound left my throat. Scout nosed at my face, whining, pawing at my chest. His eyes burned with the same urgency they had in the gully, the same message, don't give in, and somehow, I didn't. With shaking hands, I tore open the pack I had dropped earlier and still somehow carried. Inside, near frozen, was the flare gun, my last emergency tool. I fumbled it out, loaded it with numb fingers, and aimed high into the pale sky. The crack shattered the silence, a burst of red fire streaked upward, arcing above the plateau, bright against the endless white. For a moment, nothing. Only the echo of the shot bouncing across the ridges. Then, faint but real, an answering sound, a helicopter's rotors thudding somewhere far down the valley. The mountain's whispers hissed louder, angry now, echoing through my skull with the force of a storm. The letters in the snow seemed to ripple, as if trying to erase themselves, to deny what I had just done. But I clung to that sound, that human sound, that promise of escape. Scout barked wildly, tail whipping, bounding in circles as if he too understood. And for the first time since the avalanche began, I believed I might survive. The distant thump of rotors grew louder, reverberating through the thin morning air like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. For the first time since the snow gave way, I felt something close to hope. It was fragile, almost alien after hours of terror, but it lit inside me anyway. Scout barked into the sky, his voice sharp and alive, bounding to the edge of the ridge, paws digging at the snow as if he could pull the helicopter toward us by sheer will. I tried to stand. My legs shook so badly they barely held me, but the flare gun smoke still curled upward, marking me against the empty white. My hand clenched the cold metal like it was salvation itself. Then the whispers surged. They weren't faint anymore. They were everywhere, boiling in the air, crawling up my spine, filling my ears until they felt like they would bleed. Ethan, you're not leaving. You belong here. Stay. Stay with us. The ground trembled beneath me. Not violently, not another avalanche, but enough to tell me the mountain wasn't finished. Snow peeled off the far cliffs in sheets, spiraling down like white veils. The massive letters of my name stretched and warped across the plateau, writhing as though alive. The helicopter crested into view, dark against the bright sky, slicing closer with each beat of its blades. I could see it now, bright orange rescue paint, a winch hanging from its belly. A man leaned out of the side, pointing, shouting into the radio mic clamped to his face. Relief surged through me until the snow at my feet cracked open. The fissure spidered outward, splitting the plateau. Scout yelped, leaping back as the crack widened, revealing a darkness that went deeper than the mountain's bones. From that void came a sound that wasn't wind, wasn't snow shifting. It was breathing, wet, cavernous, as if the mountain itself had lungs. The whispers bled up from it, hundreds of voices overlapping, all saying my name, pulling it apart, twisting it into tones I didn't recognize as human. I staggered back, clutching Scout to me. My flare gun clattered into the snow, empty, useless. The helicopter hovered closer now, maybe 100 feet above, the rotor wash blasting snow into a blizzard around us. I heard the rescuer's voice over the PA system, distorted but urgent. Stay where you are. We're coming down. But the mountain had other plans. The fissure split wider, snow collapsing into it, chunks of ice vanishing into the void. The breathing grew louder, more frantic, as if it were inhaling me, trying to draw me down into its chest. Scout snarled at the crack, fur bristling, as if he could fight back the mountain itself. His teeth flashed white in the chaos, and he planted himself between me and that abyss. For a split second, I thought about giving in, about letting the mountain take me. Maybe it had been waiting for me all along. Maybe the avalanche wasn't chance. Maybe I was meant to be another name in its endless litany, carved into its stone, whispered until time itself eroded away. But then I saw Scout, trembling and furious, refusing to move. That dog had saved me twice already tonight. He hadn't abandoned me, even when I wanted to abandon myself. And in that moment, I realized something. The mountain could carve my name into snow. It could whisper me hollow, but it couldn't take the part of me that chose. It couldn't claim my will unless I handed it over. I grabbed Scout, clutching him against my chest, and staggered toward the helicopter. The crack widened behind us, splitting the plateau in half, snow and stone tumbling into the abyss. The winch cable dropped, swinging wildly in the rotor wash. A rescuer dangled from it, descending fast, fighting the blizzard kicked up around us. His face was obscured by goggles and a mask, but I could see his arm reaching out, motioning me forward. The mountain screamed. That's the only word for it. The fissure belched wind so strong it nearly knocked me flat. The snow beneath my boots shifted, dragging me backward. My name roared up from the abyss, louder than the helicopter, and this could repeat, louder than anything I'd ever heard. I forced my legs forward anyway, every step like moving through a nightmare. Scout squirmed in my arms, but I held tight, teeth gritted, refusing to let go. The rescuer hit the ground in front of me, dropping to his knees to steady himself against the gale. He shouted something I couldn't hear, but his hands reached for me, steady and insistent. Behind me, the crack yawned wide. A slab of snow gave way, sucking down into the void with a roar. My balance tipped. For a heartbeat, I felt weightless. Scout clutched against me, the abyss pulling us down into its lungs. Then the rescuer's hand clamped onto my arm. His grip was iron. His other arm looped the harness around me with practiced speed, locking me to the cable. Scout barked frantically, paws thrashing, but the rescuer wrapped him in his own jacket, securing him to my chest before I could even protest. The winch screamed as the helicopter hauled us upward. The mountain howled in fury. The fissure surged upward, chasing us with collapsing snow. Voices screamed my name, so many overlapping that they fused into one monstrous wail. But we rose, higher, out of reach. Snow exploded upward in a geyser, but it fell back in on itself, defeated. The fissure closed with a thunderclap, sealing the abyss as if it had never been there. And suddenly, impossibly, there was silence. We swung beneath the helicopter, Scout pressed tight against me, the rescuer's arms still braced around us both. My chest heaved with sobs I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Below, the mountains stretched endless and white, scarred by the avalanche, by the fissure, by the letters of my name carved across its skin. For a moment, I thought I saw them fading, filling in, snow drifting to erase them, my name dissolving from the mountain's story. But the whisper didn't leave me. Not entirely. As the helicopter turned toward safety, carrying me away, I swore I heard it one last time, faint and cold, curling up from the stone. This isn't over, Ethan. The helicopter ride back felt unreal, like drifting between two worlds. Inside the cabin, warmth blasted from the vents, cutting through the frost that clung to my beard and jacket. Medics fussed over me, their hands quick and efficient, checking vitals, wrapping heated blankets around me. Scout lay curled against my chest, a small furnace of life and loyalty, his breathing steady and reassuring. But my mind wasn't steady. Through the roar of the rotors, I could still hear it, soft, far beneath everything else, the mountain's whispering breath. I tried to convince myself it was adrenaline, shock, the echo of fear reverberating through my skull. Yet every time my name floated up, faint and curling like smoke, my chest tightened. Hypothermia, possible concussion, frostbite in the extremities, one medic was saying to the other, shouting over the engine noise. He's lucky he wasn't buried. Damn lucky. Lucky. I almost laughed, but it came out as a shudder. When we touched down at the ranger station base camp, everything moved quickly. Floodlights cut through the dim morning, bouncing off trucks, snowmobiles, and lines of rescuers spilling out to meet us. They pulled me onto a stretcher, bundled Scout into the arms of a volunteer vet, and whisked us both into warmth and order. The blur carried me through heated tents, questions I couldn't answer, IV bags, and the prick of needles. Every so often, I drifted into shallow sleep, jolting awake with the sound of snow cracking open or my name rasping against my ear. By the second night, when the fog in my head began to clear, they sat me down with the lead ranger. "You're one hell of a survivor," she said, leaning forward on the folding chair across from me. Her parka was unzipped, revealing a weather-beaten uniform beneath. Her face was lined and steady, eyes sharp in the way of someone who'd spent decades on mountainsides. I nodded, though the word survivor felt brittle in my chest. "You're sure you were alone up there?" she asked. The question caught me. My mouth opened, closed. I thought about the whispers, about the fissure breathing, about the letters etched into the snow. I thought about how insane it would sound if I told her any of it. Finally, I managed, "Yes, just me and my dog." Her gaze lingered on me, heavy. Maybe she saw something in my eyes I wasn't ready to admit out loud. But she didn't press. Instead, she exhaled slowly and said, "Well, you're lucky. That avalanche was the kind that usually doesn't leave anything behind." That word again. Lucky. When I was finally cleared to leave, Scout trotting faithfully at my side, the mountain loomed in the distance. From the safety of the base camp road, it looked peaceful, just another snowbound giant against the pale winter sky. But I knew better. Back home, weeks passed. The frostbite on my fingers healed. The nightmares didn't. I'd wake in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, Scout's worried eyes reflecting the dim light of the bedside lamp. Sometimes I'd swear I heard the wind pressing against the windows, whispering my name. I tried to return to routine, work, daily walks, meals shared with Scout, but something had shifted in me, a fracture that wouldn't set. I avoided mountains, avoided even photographs of snow. Every time I saw a blank field of white, my heart lurched, and I half expected to see my name carved across it again. People asked about it, of course. Friends, coworkers, neighbors. They wanted the story, the near miss, the dramatic survival tale. I gave them pieces. The avalanche, the flare, the helicopter. I kept the rest buried. Because how could I explain that I wasn't sure I had escaped at all? One night, about a month later, I took Scout for a walk down by the frozen river near my neighborhood. The ice was crusted with snow, smooth and untouched in the moonlight. Scout ran ahead, his paws kicking up little sprays of white. I stopped cold. There, across the ice, were letters. Not carved deep, not gouged by any tool, but traced lightly, as though a fingertip had brushed over the snow's surface. Ethan. I stared, frozen in place, breath fogging the night air. The river ice creaked softly, settling beneath the weight of winter. Scout barked once, sharp and urgent, then pressed against my leg, whining. His eyes darted to the letters and back to me, ears flat, tail low. He felt it too. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the word. I didn't run. I couldn't. Running would have felt like an invitation, and I didn't like acknowledgement. At home, I locked every door, drew every curtain, and sat awake with Scout pressed against me. But even there, with the walls around us, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was still on that mountain, that it had marked me, claimed me, and was simply waiting for the right moment to call me back. The world moved on. The avalanche was a statistic now, a line in the ranger's seasonal report. People camped, skied, and hiked in those mountains again, like unaware of the voices that slept beneath the snow. But I knew. And late at night, when the wind slips under the eaves, carrying that same hollow note I first heard on the slope, I still hear it. Ethan. It doesn't shout now. It doesn't scream. It only waits. Patient, eternal, because the mountain is still breathing. And one day, it will want me back. I've never told this story publicly. Not in full, and certainly not with the detail it deserves. I've written pieces of it in my field notes, but those aren't supposed to read like confessions. They're measurements, maps, and sterile reports. They don't show the sweating palms, the skipped beats in my chest, or the way I stared at limestone walls that felt like they were staring back at me. This is different. This is the story of the night I learned what it feels like when the earth itself answers you. I was in Idaho on assignment with a small survey crew in the Rockies, mapping a stretch of cavern system recently discovered by hikers who had noticed cold air gusting out of a rockfall. They'd reported it to the Forest Service, who brought us in, 3 contracted surveyors with climbing and caving experience, plus 2 rangers for safety oversight. It was meant to be straightforward. Mark the passage lines, measure widths, and identify structural hazards. No spelunking heroics, no new records, just data. The work began normally enough. We camped in a meadow at about 6,000 feet, tucked in by fir trees and granite cliffs. No service, no roads within 20 miles, only a rough mule trail bringing us in with pack supplies. I remember standing by the tents that first evening, watching the sky bruise purple behind the ridges, listening to the forest quiet down. That quiet always soothed me, but it carried a kind of edge too, the way silence presses until you can hear your own pulse. Inside the cavern, the air dropped 20 degrees in a few steps. Moisture clung to my skin and my breath fogged out in front of my headlamp. Every sound carried, the scrape of boot rubber on stone, the drip of water seeping from cracks, the tick of pebbles underfoot. When you're in those spaces long enough, you start to imagine the cave has a pulse. It exhales cold drafts, groans under its own weight, and whispers through fractures. You tell yourself it's geology, but deep down it feels more personal. That first day, I marked coordinates in the main chamber, running tape measures while my partner Ethan recorded. We spoke in short, clipped exchanges, numbers, angles, directions. The place was bigger than expected. A vaulted ceiling arched 70 feet overhead, blackened by mineral stains. Beyond, 2 side passages ran in opposite directions, one sloping down, the other climbing. We logged them for follow-up. It was standard protocol to go step by step, never splitting the group until the map held together. By the 3rd day, routine dulled the edge of fear. We joked at camp, traded campfire meals, and compared blisters. At night, though, I found myself waking more than once. The silence outside wasn't empty. It carried small interruptions, the shuffle of something heavy moving beyond the tree line, the irregular creak of branches without wind. One night, I swore I heard 3 knocks, spaced apart, deliberate, not the random crash of rockfall. I stared into the dark for an hour, clutching my knife, telling myself it was just a tree dropping frost cracks in the cold. The real moment came on the 4th morning. Ethan and I took the sloping passage while the others remained in the main chamber. We followed the tunnel downward for nearly 200 feet before it ended in what looked like a dead wall. Solid limestone, except smoother than the rough, jagged surfaces around it. I pulled off my glove and felt it, cool, faintly vibrating, as if some low resonance hummed inside the stone. I knocked, once. The sound echoed flat. I knocked again, slower, a double beat like a metronome. And then there it was, a reply. 2 knocks from inside the wall. I froze. Ethan, crouched behind me, whispered, "What the hell was that?" His voice wavered. I didn't answer. I knocked a 3rd time, 3 even taps. Silence. Then 3 answering knocks, each perfectly timed with mine. We staggered back, staring at the limestone. My heart thrashed so hard I felt it in my throat. This wasn't the hollow boom of rock carrying echoes. This was responsive, intelligent. I wanted to tell myself it was coincidence, sound bouncing strangely, reverberations syncing up, but the rhythm was exact, too exact. Ethan hissed, "Do it again." I couldn't. My hands trembled too violently. We argued in whispers. Should we call the others? Should we mark the location and leave? My rational brain screamed that the cave was playing tricks. But some deeper part of me, the animal part, recognized danger. My skin felt electrified, every hair rising. The wall wasn't just reflecting sound. Something was there. Listening. Ethan finally stepped forward, lifted his fist, and knocked once, hard. The reply came instantly. 1 deep knock, louder than before. We stumbled back so fast we tripped over the survey tape, our lights skittering across the walls. "We need to get out," Ethan muttered, eyes wide. His breathing came fast and shallow. I didn't argue. Back in the main chamber, we didn't tell the others exactly what happened, just that the passage dead-ended and we should mark it as unstable. I watched Ethan's hands as he scribbled notes, shaking, jittering, his pencil lead breaking twice. That night at camp, no one laughed. Even the rangers seemed subdued. The fire popped and cracked, but conversation died quick. Out in the dark, something knocked again. Not in the cave this time. Out in the forest, 3 sharp cracks like wood on stone. None of us moved. We just sat there, eyes wide, staring into the trees. Sleep was impossible. Every sound pressed in, twigs snapping, rocks shifting, distant taps. I pulled my sleeping bag tight around me and thought of that wall, thought of the cold vibration under my hand. What if it wasn't stone? What if it was hollow? And what if whatever was inside had followed us out? The 5th morning, Ethan refused to go back underground. He said his chest felt tight, that the air down there wasn't right. The rangers argued. Protocol said we finish the survey, but they didn't push hard. I think they felt it too, though none of us admitted it. Instead, we stayed in the main chamber, rechecking measurements, trying to act normal. But it didn't matter. The cave had already noticed us. We worked in the main chamber under a ceiling we couldn't see, just a shape implied by the headlamps haloing out and dying in a mist you could taste. The whole place felt charged, like the time before a summer storm. We talked less. Ethan taped, and I called out measurements with a voice that sounded like I'd borrowed it. Flat, too careful, trying not to waver. Our ranger lead, Morales, stood near the entrance where his radio had the best chance of catching the repeater signal. He kept pressing the transmit, letting off, pressing again, as if contact itself could be willed into existence. The little hiss of static sucked and popped at the edges of my hearing. Every time it did, I expected a knock to answer from the rock. We reshot one of the traverse lines, and it refused to behave. The lasers sent back readings that drifted an inch, then 3, then popped back to the original number like something had stepped between the beam and the wall and then slipped out again. I wiped condensation from the lens. Same hiccup. I checked the receiver prism for a hairline crack. Nothing. I set the disto against the stone and took a direct measure. The return felt wrong in my hand. Not the numbers, the feeling. A fractional delay barely long enough to be conscious. I shook it off, wrote the reading, and noted airflow variable, because that's an acceptable lie our reports allow. The air was moving, sure, but not like wind. It pulsed in faint breaths that made the short hairs on my wrist stand up. Warmth gone, then there, then gone again, always vanishing a second before the cave decided to make a new sound. Ethan wouldn't go near the sloping passage where the wall had answered us. He hovered on the other side of the chamber, eyes flicking to that mouth of darkness, and then away like it was a person he refused to meet. Jess, our 3rd surveyor, tougher than the 2 of us combined, offered to take the upslope passage with me. "We get a contour on that and call it a day," she said, but her voice landed thin. Morales nodded. The 2nd ranger, Kincaid, clicked his tongue against his teeth like a metronome, more nervous than he looked. We agreed on protocol. Line marker every 30 feet, reflective tabs at intersections, radio checks every 2 minutes. The kind of rules you cling to because the alternative is admitting rules won't help you. The upslope passage narrowed to a shoulder-width seam that made our packs scrape. The limestone here glittered with microscopic crystals, like the cave couldn't decide whether to glow or swallow light entirely. At one bend, the floor steepened and the rock under my boots vibrated for a moment, just a flutter I might have blamed on my legs, then steadied. Jess felt it too. She stared down as if she could see a muscle twitching beneath the stone. We placed a marker and kept going. A stray draft wafted past us and carried a scent that didn't belong. Faintly sweet, faintly chemical, like the inside of a vet clinic or the antiseptic they swab on skin before a shot. The smell lasted 3 breaths and then the cave reclaimed itself. Wet mineral, old water, the iron ghost of rust where no rust should be. We stopped and listened. Far away, something ticked once, like a cooled engine settling. At the next shelf, we found the first proof none of this was new. A piton, driven decades ago, its eye-ring caked in calcite. The metal had gone dull pewter, and a flake of red paint clung to the shaft near the rock. Bureau red, the kind you find left on old boundary posts. Nearby, a chalk X had bled into the damp and blurred, but someone had tried to wipe it once. The smear ran downslope in a human arc. I brushed the limestone with my glove and said nothing. Jess, though, reached into a crack and pulled a paper scrap that dissolved between her fingers. A corner of graphing was visible for a second, then turned into mush. We looked at each other. The maps we'd been given said no known penetrations. Morales had said, "You're first in. When the earth starts correcting you, the first thing to go is trust." "Radio check," I said, because saying something ordinary felt like a rope to hold. My voice went out and came back with a whisper of our own words braided into it, a half-second delayed. It sounded like another version of us had said the line from a foot behind, too close. Jess frowned and clicked her transmit again. This time there was a tiny click in the return that wasn't ours, like a tongue on a tooth. We placed the next marker and I let my knuckles brush the wall. Habit, a way to feel its pulse. The limestone felt faintly warmer than my skin, the way the back of a hand might feel if pressed to a living throat. I pulled away. "We should mark and go," Jess said. Her eyes had the hard look of someone who can hike 30 miles in a day but recognizes when a place is done with you. Before we turned, I did something stupid. I knocked. Twice, light, just enough to register on stone. The sound rolled forward and died, leaving a hush that was somehow louder than any noise. Then the cave answered, from behind us, not ahead. 2 knocks, close enough we could feel the air dink in our ears. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We backed to the last intersection slow, making sure the line stayed tight between us. My lamp caught a scuff on the passage floor. Fresh, not a boot, not a claw. More like someone had dragged a sack of wet sand and lifted it just before the floor's dissolved scallops. The line of it ended at a patch of stone that was weirdly clean, as if hands had felt it over and over. In the main chamber, our reflective tabs had been moved. Not many, not messily, not like an animal had nosed them. 3 tabs stood in a neat row pointing toward the sloping passage we were avoiding. Our spooled tape had unspooled in a single measured line across the floor. Not tangled, not random, as if someone had pulled it out to read a number they were sure we'd written wrong. A foot away, a rock about the size of a skull had been turned so that its lichen-free side faced up, showing a smooth patch with a single straight gouge in it. It looked almost like a tally mark. "Who touched this?" Morales demanded, but he didn't look angry. He looked like a man trying not to show fear under the brim of authority. Ethan didn't even bother to lift his head. "Tell me we're done," he said. "Please." That night, the air outside had the same pulse as the cave. Warmth vacuumed away first, then the sound. Twigs snapped 90 feet out, then 30, then somewhere absurdly near, and nothing moved the brush. The mules we'd tied on the tree line shifted and huffed, then froze all at once, heads up, nostrils flaring. A smell pushed through the camp that made my mouth water and my stomach pinch. Faintly sweet and metallic, like penny dust rubbed on a candy wrapper. My radio, left on the crate beside my tent, woke to a burr of static and then a tiny thock sound. Once, twice, perfectly spaced. "Who's keying up?" Morales called from his tent flap. There was no answer. The radio on my crate clicked twice more, without the button depressed, just a sound, as if the air had decided to imitate our equipment. Ethan's voice came through the dark, too calm to be real. "I recorded it," he said. He was sitting cross-legged with his headlamp turned down, phone held like a shrine. He'd recorded the sloping passage when I couldn't knock. He played the clip. First, my 2 knocks, measured, careful. Then the 2 answering knocks, exact. Then a third pair that arrived before the 3rd knock we never made. The file ended there. "That last set?" Ethan said, "We didn't do that." Morales took the phone. He didn't give it back. He told us he'd keep all our instrument logs in one place to simplify after-action reporting. He said it like a courtesy, but he took our voice memos too. He promised to make copies. He didn't. When I looked at Kincaid, he cut his eyes away and ground his boot heel into the soil like he was putting out a cigarette. The first time the earth talks back to you, you want the people in charge to be bigger than their job. You want them to grant that the rules have changed. Watching Morales clutch Ethan's phone, I understood he was as scared as we were, and fear makes people protect the story they can live with. We argued using the language of safety because it was safer than confessing the real thing. CO2 risk, unstable overhangs, hydration. I suggested what I believed we all wanted, flag it as a structural hazard and get out. Morales said we needed to mark the sloping passage as far as the dead end for any future team. Future teams, he put plural in there, as if there would be one. Jess said fine. We marked to the wall and then we're done. Ethan shook his head and didn't speak. At dawn, frost limned the meadow like a thin breath held over the earth. The cave mouth exhaled its morning cold. Jess had twisted an ankle stepping out of her tent in the night. Nothing dramatic, just the wrong angle on a frozen clump, and she couldn't risk the slope. Ethan refused, openly now. So it was me and Kincaid who didn't comment beyond a one-shoulder shrug that said he'd seen worse jobs and preferred those memories to this one. Morale stayed topside, close to the sat phone that sometimes found a half bar when the sky was empty of clouds. The sloping passage felt smaller than it had. The wall at the end looked unchanged, smooth limestone, faintly damp. But when I knelt and laid my ear against it, I felt more than heard a hum too low to register properly. Not a machine, not geological. It reminded me of resting your head on a chest and hearing not the heart, but the blood moving. I pulled my ear away and wanted to vomit. The nausea passed with a metallic taste only sterile rooms ever give me. We had a small rotary hammer in our kit for sampling. I set a core bit and placed it against the smoother section to the right of where we'd knocked. Kincaid braced the back of my shoulder with his hand to keep the bit from skating. We didn't speak. As the bit bit, the cave air went from cool to cold, like some vacuum ahead of the hole pulled the heat right through my gloves. The drill vibrated in a way that suggested void, not open air, not yet, but less than rock. The kind of knowledge your hands know before your head consents. Halfway through the core, the drill whined down. Fresh battery. I swapped it. The second battery spun strong, then stuttered like the bit had hit marrow instead of stone. Hold, Kincaid said. He didn't sound like he was giving an order. He sounded like he'd seen something at the edge of his sightline he didn't want to look at directly. I pulled the bit out and laid the drill aside. The hole we'd made was as wide as a thumb, darker than dark, as if it were not a hole but a pupil constricting to stare back at us. Air moved through that thumb-wide void and carried that smell again. Sweet antiseptic, almost floral, wrong in the mineral dark. My teeth ached. Without meaning to, I lifted my fist and tapped once on the stone beside the hole. I didn't want to. Every sane thing in me said not to. But I did. The answer came against my knuckles, not my ears. A single knock from inside the wall, the vibration of it traveling through the limestone into my bones. The radio on my chest harness rasped and then failed without failing. The light stayed on, but the speaker gave up sound, replaced by the memory of sound. In that hush, I heard my own voice say, very faintly, "Knocked back," as if from another recording I didn't remember making. Kincaid stiffened. "We're done," he said, and the words had no argument left in them. He reached for the drill. "We plug it?" I asked. He shook his head. "We mark it and leave. Let the rock keep what's inside." When we turned to go, something tapped inside the wall again, not at the hole now, but along the edge where the smoothness met rough stone. Once, then again, spaced in the cadence of footsteps. Tap, 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 tap. We kept our line tight and moved without talking. At the intersection, my lamp slid across the passage floor and picked up that same sliding scuff as before, but longer now, more confident, like a thing hauling itself out of a pool and remembering how to move. I wanted the comfort of a category: bear, cat, human. The smear gave me nothing. It was as if weight had traveled without a foot. We exited into a light that felt too white for sun. A small rockfall had slumped across one side of the entrance, fresh enough that dust still hung young and raw. Morale stood by it with his boots dirty and his jaw set. He didn't ask what we'd found. He did ask if we were hurt. We weren't. Jess sat with her ankle iced under a bandana, eyes on the tree line. Ethan was gone. No, sleeping, Morales said. The word like an apology he didn't have time to mean. He didn't sleep, Jess murmured. He stayed up doing math on the tape. It took me a second to realize she meant the unspooled line in the chamber. He thinks the length it shows means something. She didn't say what. On a boulder near camp, someone had placed 3 stones in a vertical stack, flat, round, so precisely balanced you couldn't have done it fast. The topmost stone had a smear on it, dark, translucent, tacky like sap, but with that sterile, aching smell threaded through. I touched it with a gloved finger, and the glove shone as if I dipped it in something that flashed under a black light. I sealed the glove in a sample bag out of instinct. Later, I'd wonder what I thought I was going to do with it. Send it to a lab with a note that read, "From the cave, that answers?" We tried the sat phone. It rang and then returned to silence. Morales stood in the open with it held too high, like height could purchase a signal from a sky that was done speaking to us. When he came back in, he gathered our notebooks without asking this time. "We'll consolidate," he said, which in government speech can mean safety, but in the raw world meant control. I didn't fight him. I didn't want to. I was too busy remembering the feel of that knock in my bones. The earth had reached through stone to touch me, and there was a place in me that wanted to go back and put my hand on the wall again, just to prove I could still choose to do the wrong thing. I slept in fragments. In one fragment, I was back in the sloping passage, but the smooth wall had no hole. It had skin that shone with moisture and flexed when I breathed on it. In another, I sat up in my bag because something was tapping near my ear. A moth, I thought, but when I turned my light on, there was only the shadow of the tent wall trembling in a rhythm I knew too well. I turned the light off, and the tapping stopped. Outside, the mules shifted, then so still I wondered if I was the only animal left awake in the world. Just before dawn, warmth left the air like it had been siphoned away, and in the instant after it went thin and cold, a single knock reached camp from no direction I could name. It was not loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the quiet of rooms where no one speaks, because the thing already said has filled all the space words could fill. We packed without ceremony. Morales made the call. We were done. On the walk out, the long, rough trail the mules hated, I caught the smell one last time hanging over a section of shattered limestone where you could see the mountain's broken teeth. Sweet, chemical, clean in a way that felt like the absence of life rather than life itself. Jess touched my elbow, steadying me on a bad step. "You felt it too," she said, and it wasn't a question. I nodded. We didn't talk about what we meant. When the ridge finally gave us a bar of service, the sat phone found it and then lost it and then found it again. Morales walked off downslope to speak to a voice that stayed too calm on the other end. Kincaid stood with his hands in his pockets and looked like a man who'd accepted long ago that the world has corners you don't reach into twice. Ethan lagged, staring at the ground as if the unspooled tape might be hiding under the pine needles, whispering numbers to itself. At the trucks, we found our first piece of proof that wanted to be read as ordinary. A scrap of blue webbing, cheap mover's strap, had been looped around the tailgate latch of the Ranger's rig. It was wet and cold, and when Kincaid lifted it, a line of that translucent residue stretched and snapped from the strap to the metal. He frowned and sealed it in a bag without comment. "From our gear?" Morales asked. "From someone else's," Kincaid said. "Or something else's." He met my eyes for the first time that day. "Back there at the wall, you got the sense whatever's behind it knows the rules." "What rules?" I asked. He shrugged. "The ones that say if you knock, you're asking to be answered." He looked like a man thinking back through his own catalog, trying to place ours inside it. Anglers tap ice, prospectors tap rock, The thing under anything that can be tapped learns quick who's on the other side. He zipped the bag closed and wiped his hands on his pants, even though there was nothing on them to see. We drove out without looking in the rear view. The first town with a diner felt unreal, all chrome and warm voices and the smell of coffee. We sat at the counter and said nothing to each other. A clock ticked over the kitchen doorway, and for a moment the rhythm matched a pattern that made my stomach lurch. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. And then the cook banged a pan and the spell broke. Morales made some calls. He used words like closure, safety review, additional assessment. He said hazard 3 times, as if repetition could pin truth to paperwork. When he hung up, he said the area would be closed for maintenance until further notice, and it sounded like a towel thrown over a mirror. I went to the restroom to wash my hands and couldn't bring myself to touch the faucet handle with bare skin. I thought of the hole we drilled, small and deliberate, and the way air breathed through it, like a mouth, too careful to open wider. I splashed water on my face and smelled, so faint I could have made it up, a sweetness that didn't belong in a highway bathroom. Behind the mirror, the plumbing ticked. Once. Then again. Perfectly spaced. I dried my hands and walked out into noise and sunlight and the ordinary cruelty of day, and none of it convinced me I'd left the cave at all. The drive back should have been a relief. Once you've crossed enough timberline and dirt road to see the valley flatten, you expect your shoulders to loosen, your lungs to catch the rhythm of lowland air. But for me, every mile deeper into civilization felt thinner, like distance wasn't safety but just slack in a rope that something could pull tight again whenever it wanted. Ethan wouldn't speak. He sat in the back seat of Morales' truck, staring out the window at lodgepole and sage and the blur of fences. He held his hands in his lap like they didn't belong to him. At one point I glanced back and saw him flexing his fingers in pairs, 2 at a time, then 2 again, as if he was keeping time with something only he could hear. Jess dozed with her ankle propped, but even in sleep her face twitched. Like she was dreaming she was still underground. Morales kept the radio off. Normally he'd have Forest Service chatter humming, weather reports, or incident call-ins, but the cab rode silent except for tires chewing gravel. Kincaid sat shotgun with his jaw tight, rubbing his thumb across his knuckles. Now and then he would tilt his head, as if testing whether a sound he thought he heard was real. He never said what it was. We dropped the mules and gear at the ranger station. Paperwork became a wall between us and truth. Forms marked unstable, unsafe, collapse hazard. Morales signed and dated neat pen strokes the way you might wrap a corpse before handing it to strangers. No need to mention anomalies, he said flatly, and that was the last time the wall was named out loud. The rest of the crew dispersed within days. Jess returned to her district. Kincaid was reassigned to fire watch duties in Montana. Ethan, he never checked out with me. I called his number twice the week after, and both times a voicemail picked up with only silence and then, faintly, a double knock before the tone cut in. I told myself it was a glitch. Phones echo weird, towers clip transmissions, but I stopped calling after that. I tried to carry on. Went back to other surveys, other caverns. Nothing spectacular, just narrow fissures, lava tubes, karst windows. Yet in every one, I caught myself listening too hard to my own taps, refusing to lay knuckles to stone. If I dropped a tool and it clinked twice, I'd freeze. If water dripped rhythmically, I'd move faster, outpacing the sound before it fell into a pattern. Months later, the official report circulated, entrance sealed due to instability, future evaluation contingent on funding. The cave was erased on paper. But at night, when the house creaks with its own timber bones, I remember the hole we drilled, the size of a thumbprint, dark as a pupil, and I swear I hear faint air moving through it still. What haunts me most isn't what I felt in that wall. It's what I imagine Ethan kept hearing long after. The way his fingers moved, 2 and 2, keeping time, like he'd brought the rhythm out with him and it hadn't let him go. I don't go back to Idaho. I tell people it's because contracts dried up or because I prefer softer rock systems. The truth is, I don't trust myself not to listen again. Not to answer when the earth decides to knock, because once it knows you'll knock back, it never forgets. And some nights, God help me, I still wake to that sound. Not loud, not near, just enough, 2 knocks, in perfect rhythm from inside the walls of my own house. I never thought the loneliest sound I'd ever hear would be silence. Not the kind of silence you notice in a city apartment at 2 in the morning, where the hum of traffic still presses faintly through the walls. Not the pause between conversations at a dinner table, where someone will eventually clear their throat and speak again. No, this was the silence of the Appalachian woods. Thick, heavy, absolute. It pressed against me, sat in my ears like wet cotton, made me aware of my own heartbeat, my own pulse. Out there, in those endless trees, silence wasn't absence. It was presence. It was something alive. I had taken the job because I thought I needed the quiet. I was 29 then, burned out from years of living in a crowded town, scraping by on freelance work, carrying with me the constant background hum of disappointment. My father had died the year before, and grief had a way of hollowing me out from the inside, making me crave space. So when I saw the listing, seasonal maintenance position at a small fire lookout and cabin station in the Appalachian National Forest, I didn't think twice. The pay was barely enough to cover gas, but the job promised isolation, provided lodging, and a chance to start over, at least for a while. The cabin was 2 miles up a dirt road that most maps didn't even bother to mark. There was no cell service once you passed the ranger station at the bottom of the valley. Supplies came once every 3 weeks on a truck driven by a man named Curtis, who looked like he'd been carved out of the same weathered stone as the mountains themselves. He said little, just unloaded boxes, nodded, and disappeared back down the trail before dusk. It was just me up there. A cabin with a wood stove, a thin bed, and a desk by the window that overlooked the stretch of ridgeline. At night, the stars weren't twinkling. They were sharp, cutting through the blackness so bright I sometimes had to look away. The first week, I thought it was beautiful. The second week, I realized beauty could feel oppressive when it was constant, when there was no one to turn to and share it with, when the silence grew so thick it pressed into your bones. My work was simple: keep the cabin and the lookout tower in shape, monitor weather readings, and report anything unusual by radio. Unusual meant fire smoke, mostly, but the ranger who trained me offhandedly mentioned other things. If you hear gunshots too close or lights where there shouldn't be lights, just call it in. I didn't ask questions then. Maybe I should have. By the third week, I noticed something odd. It wasn't dramatic at first, just small details, things easy to dismiss. My firewood stack, neatly piled against the wall, looked shifted one morning. Not lessened, just rearranged, as though someone had run their hands across it, changing the order. Then the tool shed door, which I always kept locked, hung slightly open one afternoon. I assumed I had forgotten to secure it. I told myself I was tired. But then came the prints. The soil around the cabin was soft from recent rain, and when I stepped outside one morning, I saw them. Muddy impressions near the edge of the clearing. Not boots, not shoes. Bare feet. Large, but not impossibly so. Just big enough to belong to a man. They weren't fresh, not sharp-edged to hack, but they were clear enough to raise the hairs along the back of my neck. That day, I sat by the radio longer than usual. My finger hovered over the switch, tempted to call the ranger station, but I didn't. Something in me resisted. Maybe pride, maybe denial. I told myself people wandered. Hunters, hikers, locals who knew these woods better than any ranger ever could. And if they passed close to the cabin, well, this wasn't my land to claim. That night, though, I struggled to sleep. The silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt watchful. Every creak of the cabin's wooden frame became footsteps in my imagination. Every brush of wind against the eaves became breath. A week later, Curtis brought supplies again. He was unloading boxes when I asked him, carefully, casually, if many people came through these woods. He looked up from the crate of canned beans, squinting at me like I'd asked the wrong kind of question. Not these parts, he said. Not anymore. Anymore? I asked. He just shrugged, then said, lock your doors at night. And that was all. I tried to laugh it off, but when I turned in that night, I noticed something I couldn't ignore. The cabin's front door had fresh scratches along the bottom. Not claw marks, not animal. These were straight lines, deliberate, like someone had taken a knife and dragged it slowly across the wood. Sleep didn't come easy after that. I started keeping the oil lamp burning long after midnight, the shadows swaying across the walls like they had weight of their own. My mind raced with explanations. Maybe teenagers sneaking around, maybe hunters with nothing better to do, maybe even Curtis himself, testing the nerves of the new guy on the mountain. But deep down, I felt it. Something colder, something stranger. The kind of fear you can't reason away. By the start of my second month, I began hearing things at night. Not just the groan of wood or wind. This was different. Knocks, 3 of them. Slow, deliberate. Always against the back wall of the cabin, the side that faced the endless forest. I'd sit up in bed, holding my breath, waiting for more. Sometimes nothing followed. Other times, after a stretch of silence, I'd hear it again. 3 knocks. I told myself it could be trees, branches swaying in the wind, striking the wood just right. But when I went out the next morning, flashlight trembling in my hand, the trees stood several feet away. Nothing could have reached the wall without stepping into the clearing. And there in the dirt, I saw them again. Prints. Bare. Human. I don't know why I didn't pack up right then and walk back down the mountain. Pride, maybe. Or the sense of commitment I'd built up. The idea that if I left, I'd be running from more than just the cabin. I'd be running from myself, from every failure, every weight I'd been carrying since my father's death. I wanted to prove I could endure, that silence didn't have to break me. But silence wasn't what I was up against anymore. The next knock came 3 nights later. Only this time, it was followed by something else. A voice. It was faint, muffled through the cabin wall, but I swear I heard it. A man's voice, low, almost a whisper. Words I couldn't make out, syllables carried by the grain of the wood. I pressed my ear against the wall, my chest tight, but the moment I did, the sound stopped. I didn't sleep at all that night. By morning, exhaustion had set in, the kind that makes every corner of your vision pulse with shadows. I stumbled through my chores, checked the tower, swept the floor, but my mind wasn't on any of it. My mind was on the wall. The voice, the fact that the world outside that cabin didn't feel like wilderness anymore. It felt like someone else's home, and I was the intruder. That evening, just before dusk, I caught sight of something at the tree line. A figure. Still, watching. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and it was gone. But I knew then, I wasn't alone. I told myself I could have imagined it, the figure at the tree line. Eyes play tricks in that kind of light, when dusk lays itself like a veil between day and night. Shapes shift, shadows stretch in unnatural ways. But I wasn't a stranger to the outdoors. I knew the difference between the sway of a branch and the stillness of a body. And I knew what I'd seen. For the rest of that night, I kept the lantern burning on the table and sat beside it, staring out the window until my eyes blurred. I wanted to convince myself I'd see nothing, that the forest would just be the forest. The same tangle of dark branches and leaves that had surrounded me since I arrived. But my chest never loosened. My shoulders never dropped. Even in silence, I felt watched. The next morning, I woke in the chair, the lamp long burned out, my neck stiff. I checked the clearing. No footprints this time. No signs of anyone passing through. The only sound was the distant chatter of birds, and for a moment I felt foolish, like a child terrified of his own shadow. But fear doesn't let go once it's found a place inside you. It clings like damp that seeps into wood unseen until rot sets in. By the middle of the day, I decided to climb the lookout tower. The climb itself was work. Wooden steps, steep, winding, each one creaking as if groaning beneath my weight. At the top, though, the view stretched for miles. Ridge upon ridge of mountains rolled out like green waves under the sky, the kind of beauty that had drawn me there in the first place. I scanned with the old binoculars hanging on a hook by the window. My hands trembled as I adjusted the focus, panning slowly across the tree line. Most of what I saw was unbroken wilderness. But then, just for a second, I caught something. Smoke, thin, barely visible, rising from a valley a mile to the east. Protocol said I should radio it in, so I did. Static filled the channel before a ranger's voice cut through, calm, low, practiced. I gave the coordinates, described the plume. The ranger thanked me, said they'd send someone to check it out. His tone carried no urgency, no alarm. I told myself that meant it was nothing, but my stomach twisted, because I knew what it meant. Someone else was out there. That night, the knocks returned. Louder this time. 3, then silence, then 3 again. I sat frozen on my bed, clutching the oil lamp in my hand like a weapon, my breath coming in short bursts. My heart hammered so hard I felt it in my throat. The knocks came once more, slow and deliberate. And then, just as before, the whisper. It was clearer this time. The words scraped against the wood, thin, strained, almost like a question. I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from making a sound, and then suddenly nothing. The forest fell silent again. Too silent. No crickets, no owls, no rustle of leaves, just a stillness that was heavier than sound. When morning came, I forced myself to go outside. My boots sank into damp earth, the smell of moss and wet bark thick in the air. I walked slowly around the cabin, every nerve on edge. And there, against the back wall, I saw something I can never forget. A handprint. Not on the dirt this time. Not in the soil, on the wood itself. Smudged, dark. Streaks that looked like mud at first glance, but carried a faint metallic tang when I leaned closer. Blood. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. My first thought was that someone was hurt, that whoever had been knocking, whispering, lurking out there was bleeding and needed help. That instinct, human compassion, flared for only a moment before something colder set in. Because the print wasn't desperate. It wasn't smeared as if someone had leaned for support. It was deliberate, pressed flat, left there for me to find. I didn't eat that day. Couldn't. My hands shook too badly to hold a fork, my stomach too knotted to take in food. I spent most of the daylight hours on the porch with the rifle the rangers had left in the cabin, just in case. I'd laughed at it when I first arrived. Now it was the only thing keeping me tethered. That evening, Curtis arrived earlier than usual. His truck rattled up the dirt road, a cloud of dust rising behind it. Relief flooded me at the sight of another human face. "You're pale," he said as he hauled a crate onto the porch. His eyes lingered on me longer than usual, studying, weighing. I told him, haltingly, carefully, what I'd seen. The prints, the knocks, the whisper, the handprint. I expected disbelief, a laugh, maybe even a scolding for letting my imagination run wild. But Curtis didn't laugh, he didn't scold, he just set the crate down, wiped his hands on his jeans, and said, "Don't go looking for it." "For what?" I asked, my voice thin. He shook his head, eyes fixed on the tree line. "Some things out here don't want to be found, and if they come close enough for you to notice, it's because they already know too much about you." I wanted to press him, but before I could, he climbed into the truck, muttered a farewell, and drove off. The sound of the engine faded until I was left with silence again, and those words gnawed at me. That night, I barricaded the door with the heavy desk, sat with the rifle across my lap, the oil lamp flickering, shadows dancing along the walls, my ears strained at every creak, every shifting board, every sigh of wind, and then, sometime after midnight, it came again. Not a knock this time. Not even a whisper. A scrape. Long, slow, deliberate. Across the wood of the wall. I couldn't move. My chest locked, my throat clenched. Then, after a pause, another sound. A laugh. Faint, low, not loud enough to be certain, but there, undeniably there. I sat frozen until the first light of dawn. When the sun finally cut through the trees, I dared to look outside. No footprints this time. No handprints. No blood. Nothing but the cabin standing silent in the clearing, as if nothing had happened at all. But I knew better. because when I returned inside, something was different. On the table where I had left my journal the night before, there was a single page torn free. Not written in my hand, not my words, just one sentence scrawled in dark ink. I see you. My first instinct was denial. The handwriting couldn't be real. My mind had to be fraying under the strain of isolation, inventing signs, bending shadows into shapes that weren't there. I told myself maybe I had written it sleepwalking, lost in some dream state I didn't remember. But even as I formed that excuse, I knew it wasn't true, because the ink was still wet. I touched the edge of the page with a trembling fingertip, and the smear left a faint black streak across my skin. Whoever had written it hadn't just been here. They had been here while I was inside, locked in, barricaded, clutching the rifle like a fool. The page shook in my hand. My throat tightened so hard I could barely swallow. The one place I thought I could trust, the cabin, wasn't mine anymore. It had never been mine. It was porous, fragile, a box in the woods with too many cracks. I burned the page in the stove, watched the flame curl the edges, blacken the words, devour the message. Ash collapsed into itself, and I stood there long after the last ember died, hands shaking, sweat dripping down my back despite the cold. Destroying it didn't erase it. If anything, it felt like feeding it. That night, I didn't sleep. My body refused. Every time my eyelids sagged, some noise, real or imagined, snapped me back. A groan in the floorboards, a breath in the wind, the pop of the stove settling metal. The woods around me were alive, and not in the way rangers and hikers celebrated. Not in the way brochures romanticized. They were alive like something watching, waiting. By dawn, exhaustion made the world sway when I moved. My hands felt disconnected from my body. I forced myself through chores like a marionette. Sweep, chop wood, check the tower, write in the logbook. I clung to routine like a lifeline, telling myself structure would keep me sane. But sanity had already slipped. It was on the third climb to the tower that day that I saw something that nearly broke me. The binoculars shook in my hands as I scanned the eastern ridgeline. And there, between two trees, far but unmistakable, was a figure, not moving, not shifting, just standing, facing the tower. I couldn't see the face, couldn't even tell if it was a man or woman, but every nerve in my body screamed the same truth. It was watching me. I lowered the binoculars, rubbed my eyes, lifted them again. The space was empty. The trees swayed in the wind. Nothing else. I nearly dropped the binoculars as my arms went limp. Because even though the figure was gone, the feeling wasn't. The feeling that once your eyes adjust, once you look too long, you've shown them too much of yourself. I stumbled back to the cabin, barely able to breathe, locked the door, sat on the floor with my back against it, the rifle across my knees, and in that position something inside me cracked. I began to talk out loud, not to myself, not exactly, to the presence. I don't want trouble, I whispered, voice hoarse. I'm just here for the season, just here to work. You don't need to. My words choked off. What was I doing? Bargaining with the air, with trees, with my own unraveling mind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just my mind. Something was out there, something listening. That night, no knocks came, no whispers, no scrape. But the absence was worse than any of it, because silence is never empty in those woods. It's loaded, taut, like a rope drawn tighter and tighter, waiting to snap. When morning came, I found something new. On the porch, by the steps, a pile of stones, small, smooth river stones stacked into a neat tower, 4 high. I froze, looked around the clearing. The forest answered with nothing but stillness. Carefully, I nudged the stones with my boot until the stack collapsed. My chest rose and fell with shallow, panicked breaths. I told myself it was kids, pranksters, locals with too much time. But the lie didn't hold, because I was miles into the forest. No trails led here. No kids wandered this deep. And if it was locals, they wanted me to know. I stayed inside the cabin all that day, like pacing, wearing grooves into the wooden floor. My reflection in the dusty window looked thinner, older. My beard had grown in thick, my eyes sunken, skin pale from the constant stress. I barely recognized myself. By dusk, I made a choice. I couldn't keep waiting, reacting. I had to take back some control, even if it was small. So I stayed awake again, this time crouched by the window, rifle resting on the sill, lamp turned low, watching. For hours, nothing moved. The trees bent in the wind, night creatures stirred and fell silent again. The stars carved their bright holes into the black sky. And then, just past midnight, movement. At the edge of the clearing, half hidden by shadow, the figure stood again, closer this time. My breath caught. My finger curled against the trigger, though I didn't raise the rifle. I wanted to shout, to demand who they were, what they wanted. But my voice failed me. I just stared, frozen, my heart thundering in my chest. And then, as if it knew I was watching, the figure stepped forward. One slow step. Another. The clearing swallowed it in darkness before I could make out details. The shape melted back into the trees. Gone. I didn't move for the rest of the night. By dawn, I felt hollow, like part of me had been scraped clean. I didn't even pretend to follow my routine. I sat at the desk, staring at the journal, trying to steady my shaking hand enough to write something, anything, that would anchor me. But when I opened it, I found another page missing. This time, no message was left behind. Just absence. My throat burned. My eyes stung. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I slammed the journal shut, shoved it into the drawer, locked it, as if that could stop the theft, the intrusion. The rest of that day blurred. Hunger gnawed at me, but I couldn't eat. Thirst parched me, but every sip of water felt like swallowing stone. Time didn't move right. It sagged, folded in on itself. And then night came again. I braced myself for knocks, for whispers, for laughter. Instead, something else. A sound I'll never forget. Singing. Faint, drifting through the trees, carried on the wind like smoke. A low, wordless tune, rising and falling, slow and steady. Not close, not far, just enough to reach me. My body locked in place. Every hair on my arm stood on end. I couldn't make out words. Maybe there weren't any. But the melody carried a rhythm that clawed at something deep inside me. Not comfort, not beauty, recognition. Like I'd heard it before, long ago, though I knew I hadn't. It went on for minutes, 10 maybe more, before it faded into nothing. I sat there in the dark, rifle trembling in my hands, the tune echoing in my skull long after the air grew silent again. And I realized then, this wasn't random. This wasn't kids or hikers or hunters. Whatever was out there wasn't just watching me. It was learning me. I don't know how long I sat there after the singing stopped. Time stretched, unmoored, slipping through my fingers like water. I only remember the tightness in my chest, the sting in my eyes from holding them open too long, and the sound of my own breathing rasping against the walls of the cabin. Every instinct told me to run, to flee down the mountain, but some heavier instinct kept me rooted. Fear or pride, or maybe the quiet understanding that whatever was out there, it wasn't the kind of thing you could outrun. When dawn finally came, it didn't feel like relief. The sunlight didn't warm me. If anything, it made the clearing feel smaller, more exposed, like I was under a magnifying glass. I needed air, real air. I stepped outside, boots crunching against frost-hardened dirt, my eyes flicking to every tree, every shadow. The forest stood silent, too silent again, not even the chatter of birds, and that's when I noticed something was gone. The stack of firewood I'd split weeks ago, neatly piled along the wall of the cabin, had vanished. Not knocked over, not scattered. Gone. Every last piece. I froze, my mouth dry. That wood had been there the day before. I'd walked past it half a dozen times, and now the bare wall leaned back at me, empty. Whoever had taken it would have needed hours, maybe all night, to move it without waking me. And for what? Firewood wasn't scarce out here. The forest itself was endless fuel. It wasn't theft. It was message. I stumbled back inside, slamming the door, locking it. My pulse thudded in my ears so loudly it drowned out thought. My breaths came shallow, ragged, my chest heaving like I'd run miles uphill. The cabin walls felt closer than ever, pressing in, thin and fragile. For the first time since I arrived, I reached for the radio. My fingers shook so violently I fumbled the switch twice before static crackled through. "Station 4, I said, voice breaking. "This is Lookout Ridge Cabin." I need assistance." The static hissed back. I repeated myself, louder this time, desperation clawing up my throat. Still nothing. I adjusted the frequency, scanned channels. More static, no voices. The silence wasn't just around me now. It was inside the wires, the air itself. I dropped the receiver, my knees weak, bile rising in my throat. The one thread tethering me to the outside world had snapped. The rest of that day passed in fragments. I tried to eat, but food turned to ash in my mouth. I tried to sleep, but every time my eyelids shut, the tune returned, humming low and steady, as if someone pressed it directly against my skull. By evening, I thought I might go mad if I stayed inside. The cabin was suffocating me, closing in like a coffin. So I did something reckless, something I regret more than anything. I lit a lantern, slung the rifle over my shoulder, and stepped into the forest. The air was cold enough to sting, sharp with the smell of damp leaves and earth. My lantern's glow cut a fragile circle into the dark, every tree trunk looming like a silent witness. I told myself I would just check the perimeter, prove to myself there was nothing there. But the deeper I went, the more I realized I wasn't in control. The forest had changed. Paths that should have been familiar twisted strangely, leading me in circles. The ground dipped where it shouldn't. Roots tangled like traps beneath the leaves. More than once, I stumbled, my heart lurching into my throat as I caught myself on rough bark. And then, somewhere behind me, a branch snapped. I froze, slowly turned. The lantern's glow barely touched the trees, but in that moment, I felt it. The weight of eyes, the same stillness as the figure at the tree line. Watching, measuring. "Who's there?" My voice cracked, raw and useless. Silence answered. I gripped the rifle tighter, raised the lantern higher. My own shadow stretched long and distorted against the trunks, a warped figure that looked less like me and more like something hollowed out. I backed up one step, then another. My boots cracked twigs, the forest didn't answer, and then the song began again, closer this time, clearer. Not a melody drifting on wind, a voice, male, deep, humming low, slow, as if it had all the time in the world. My blood went cold. My lantern trembled in my hand, the glass rattling. The sound moved, not toward me, not away, around, circling. I spun in place, trying to find it, but the glow only stretched so far, and beyond it the woods swallowed everything. The humming stopped, and in the silence a new sound. My name, whispered, barely audible, but unmistakable. I bolted. Branches whipped my face, roots snagged my boots, my breath tore from my throat in ragged gasps. The lantern nearly slipped from my hand, swinging wildly, casting frantic shadows. I didn't know where I was running, only that I had to get back to the cabin. Back to walls, however thin, however fragile. I don't know how long I ran. Time collapsed into panic. At some point, my boots hit the dirt road, and I realized I'd circled back without knowing how. The cabin loomed ahead, its dark outline a desperate salvation. I stumbled up the steps, slammed the door, locked it, shoved the desk back against it. My chest heaved, my vision blurred. I dropped the lantern on the table, its light flickering weakly against the walls. For long minutes I stood there, listening, every muscle taut, rifle clenched. But no one followed. The forest outside stood silent, and that silence was worse than the song. Worse than the whisper, because it felt like laughter. The next morning, I found something new waiting for me. On the porch, arranged in a neat circle, were the firewood pieces that had gone missing, stacked not in a pile, but laid end to end, enclosing the spot where I always stood when I first stepped outside. A ring, a boundary, or a cage. I stared at the ring of firewood until the cold bit through my boots. My breath rose in short clouds, my chest tight as though the air itself resisted entering my lungs. The arrangement was too neat, too careful, as if each log had been placed with purpose. It wasn't just a prank, it was ritual. I couldn't bring myself to step into it. My legs refused, trembling with the animal certainty that crossing that circle would mean giving something away. So I backed into the cabin, locked the door again, and sat against it, rifle resting across my lap. All morning, my eyes flicked back to the window, to that shape of wood on the porch. The ring never shifted, never broke. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I looked away too long, it would. By afternoon, exhaustion won. I hadn't really slept in days, only drifted in shallow bursts that left me more frayed than before. My body sagged under the weight of it, my head heavy, eyes burning. Against my will, I drifted into a kind of half-sleep. And when I woke, I wasn't in the cabin anymore. I jolted upright, my heart seizing. The ground beneath me was cold dirt, soft with damp moss. Trees loomed overhead, their branches clutching the sky. My lantern sat beside me, dark, as though I had placed it there myself. I scrambled to my feet, panic clawing through me. My rifle was gone, my journal too. My breath tore from my throat in jagged bursts. I spun in circles, searching for any landmark, anything familiar. Then, through the trees, I saw it. The cabin. Only wrong. It sat where it always had, but its shape was off, its edges warped. The roofline sagged too steep, the windows too narrow, as though someone had rebuilt it from memory but got the details wrong. Smoke curled from the chimney, though. I hadn't lit the stove in days. My legs carried me forward before my mind could resist. Each step felt like wading through water, the air thick, heavy, buzzing faintly like static. When I reached the porch, the ring of wood was still there, but the logs were fresh now, bark slick with sap, as if they'd just been cut. My hand hovered above the door latch, shaking. I wanted to go inside, but my body screamed at me not to. I stood there frozen, caught between urges, until the sound came. Not from the woods, from inside. Footsteps, slow, heavy, pacing. The blood drained from my face. My mouth went dry. There was no one else supposed to be there. No ranger, no hiker, no Curtis. And yet the boards groaned beneath weight, steady, deliberate. I backed away, step by step, until my heel caught on a root and I stumbled hard to the ground. My head cracked against dirt. Stars exploded across my vision, and then black. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in the cabin. The rifle leaned against the wall. The journal sat closed on the desk. The firewood ring was gone, the porch empty. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My body felt heavy, foreign. My head throbbed, my vision swam. I staggered to the desk, gripped it for balance, and opened the journal. Another page was missing. This time, 2 words were scrawled in the margin of the next. Not yet. I shoved the book shut, bile burning the back of my throat. My vision blurred with rage and terror and helplessness all at once. I wanted to scream into the trees, demand answers, force something to reveal itself. But I didn't, because I knew the silence was listening. The hours bled together after that. I don't remember eating. I don't remember drinking. My hands shook too violently to write. My reflection in the window looked like a stranger, skin pale, beard matted, eyes ringed with dark hollows. I wasn't sure if the forest was dismantling me or if I was doing it myself. That night, I tried to force myself to stay awake, to anchor myself by counting breaths, but at some point my body betrayed me. I woke again outside, this time deeper in the woods. No lantern, no rifle, no cabin in sight, just trees, towering and endless, their trunks pressed so close together they seemed to lean in. The air was damp, smelling of rot and something sour, metallic. My skin prickled with goose flesh. My ears strained for any sound, but the woods pressed silence into me like a hand clamped over my mouth. Then, faint at first, I heard it. Whispering. Not one voice. Many. Layered, overlapping, a chorus too soft to distinguish words, but too deliberate to be the wind. I spun in circles, every direction the same, every tree identical. The whispers rose and fell, coming closer, then pulling back. And then, without warning, they stopped. Something brushed my shoulder. I spun again, lashing at the air with my fists, but nothing was there. My pulse hammered so hard I felt dizzy, lightheaded, my vision swimming. I stumbled forward blindly, crashing through undergrowth until I tripped and fell hard against the roots of a massive oak. When I lifted my head, the cabin loomed in front of me again. This time perfectly normal. I clawed my way up the steps, burst inside, slammed the door, collapsed against it, gasping, chest heaving like I'd run a marathon. The desk sat where it always had. The rifle leaned against the wall, the stove cold and dark. But my journal lay open now, though I hadn't touched it. On the newest page, scrawled in the same jagged hand as before, almost. I didn't leave the cabin the next day. Not once. I sat in the corner with the rifle across my lap, lantern burning low, my body trembling with every creak of the wood. I couldn't trust the forest. I couldn't trust the cabin. I couldn't even trust myself. Because I knew, deep down, the next time I woke up outside, I might not make it back. And maybe that was the point. I don't remember falling asleep. I don't remember closing my eyes or even letting my head rest. But when I woke, the light had shifted. The lantern was out. The window glowed pale with morning. Something was wrong immediately. The air was different. It smelled old, like mildew and dust, as if the cabin had been sealed for years. My throat was dry as sandpaper. My stomach cramped with a hollow ache. I stumbled to the shelves where I kept my food, half expecting the cans to still be stacked neatly. But the shelf was nearly empty. Only one can of beans remained. The others, dozens of them, were gone. I staggered back, mind clawing at the impossible math. I'd brought enough supplies for weeks. I'd been careful, counted and recounted. I couldn't have eaten that much, unless I'd been gone longer than I realized. I rushed to the desk. The journal still lay open, but it wasn't where I'd left it. More pages were missing now, torn clean away. My handwriting filled the margins of what remained, scrawled, frantic, in my own hand, except I had no memory of writing any of it. Phrases repeated over and over. They are waiting. Don't go outside. Curtis knew. I hear them. The words blurred as I read, my chest tightening with nausea. I couldn't deny it anymore. I was losing time, whole days, maybe weeks. Something was hollowing my life out and leaving me only fragments. I stumbled to the door, flung it open. The world outside looked the same trees, the same gray sky, but it felt different, older somehow. The snow on the porch was gone, melted into mud. The ring of firewood had vanished completely. My heart hammered as I stepped off the porch. My legs were weak, my body trembling like I hadn't eaten in days. That's when I saw the footprints. Not mine. Small, light, barefoot, leading away from the cabin into the woods. I crouched, breath catching in my throat. The prints were fresh, pressed into the mud, toes splayed like a child's. But no child should be out here. Not in this place. Not in this season. My body moved before my brain could stop it. I followed. The prints wound between trees, weaving deeper into the forest. My breath grew shallow. My ears rang with each step. I expected them to vanish at any moment, but they didn't. They drew me farther and farther until the cabin was out of sight. Then, ahead I saw it. An old RV. It sat half sunk in the dirt, its tires rotted flat, windows cracked, the body streaked with rust. Moss crawled up the sides. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The footprints led straight to its door. I froze, my gut twisting. The air here felt heavier, charged. My breath caught like the forest itself was holding it hostage. Slowly, trembling, I reached for the handle. The metal was cold, biting against my skin. With a deep breath, I yanked the door open. Inside, the air was damp and sour. The floor was littered with scraps of paper, old clothes, broken dishes. The smell of rot was thick, almost sweet. And on the far wall, scratched deep into the paneling, were words, "Don't let them take you outside." My chest tightened. My hands shook. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye. A journal. It lay half buried beneath a pile of clothes. I pulled it free, my stomach dropping as I brushed off the dirt. The cover was weathered, stained with water, but the name etched faintly into the inside cover was clear. Curtis Hale. My hands trembled as I flipped through. The pages were warped, but his handwriting was there, sharp, hurried, desperate. They come at night. They whisper in the trees. They took Johnny first. I can't tell if it's days or weeks anymore. If I leave the circle, I wake somewhere else. They don't want us to stay. They want us gone. My breath came in ragged gasps as I reached the final page. Half the sheet was torn out, but one sentence remained, carved deep enough to nearly rip through the paper. If you wake in the woods, it means they've chosen you. The journal slipped from my hands. My knees gave out, crashing against the rotten floor. My mind reeled, spinning with the words. Curtis hadn't just disappeared, he'd been taken, drawn into the same cycle I was now trapped in. A sound echoed behind me, not from the RV, from the woods. Footsteps, dozens of them, moving together, slow, careful. The whispers followed, low, layered, crawling through the trees like smoke. Panic surged hot in my chest. I snatched the journal, shoved it under my coat, and bolted. Out of the RV, through the trees, branches clawing my face and arms. The footsteps followed, steady, unhurried, like they knew I couldn't escape. I ran blind, lungs tearing, legs screaming, until the cabin appeared through the trees. I didn't think. I dove inside, slammed the door, dropped the bar across it, and collapsed onto the floor. The footsteps didn't follow. The whispers didn't fade, but they didn't come closer either. They lingered outside, wrapping the cabin like a net. I curled against the wall, Curtis's journal clutched against my chest, rocking like a child, whispering to myself that I was still here, still inside, still alive. But I knew deep down it was only a matter of time, because if Curtis's words were true, then waking in the woods wasn't an accident, it was a choice. And they had already chosen me. I didn't sleep that night. The whispers pressed against the walls, rising and falling like a tide. Every so often, I swore I heard a laugh buried in them. Soft, childlike, but wrong, as if someone had taught a crow to mimic human joy. The sound curdled in my stomach. I sat at the desk, Curtis's journal open before me, tracing the words again and again with my finger like they might change if I looked long enough. They come at night. They whisper in the trees. They took Johnny first. I kept coming back to that line. Who was Johnny? Another worker? A camper? Someone Curtis had known? Or had Johnny been like me? Just another temporary caretaker sent here because nobody else wanted the job? My chest tightened. Maybe Johnny had been the one whose shoes I'd found. Maybe Curtis had watched him vanish, just like I was watching myself unravel now. The wind shifted outside. The whispers rose, closer now, almost pressed to the glass. I forced myself not to look, but my eyes betrayed me anyway. In the window, pale shapes flickered between the trees. Not solid, not fully there, like figures behind frosted glass. They moved slowly, endlessly circling the cabin. My body locked. I couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. Then, without warning, they stopped. Silence, the kind that feels wrong, heavy, staged. That was somehow worse than the whispers. I pressed my back to the wall and waited. Minutes stretched like hours, every second a tight coil in my chest. Then a sound broke the stillness. Knock, knock, knock on the door. I froze. The knocks were measured, deliberate, not frantic, not human. Whoever or whatever it wasn't trying to break in. It was asking. Curtis's words flashed in my mind. Don't let them take you outside. I held my breath. The knocks stopped, silence again, and then faintly a voice. Please, help me. It was small, fragile like a young boy. Every instinct screamed no. It was a trick. I knew it was a trick. But my body betrayed me. My hand reached for the bar on the door before I could stop myself. I clenched my fists tight, nails digging into my palm until blood welled. I couldn't open it. I wouldn't. The voice called again, softer this time, stretching into something inhuman. The syllables warped, bending in the air, turning guttural, layered with echoes. Then silence. The night passed like that, bursts of sound, long silences, shapes pacing outside, and me at the desk, teeth grinding until my jaw ached. When morning finally came, I didn't trust it. The light looked wrong. Too bright, too clean. But hunger gnawed at me, and my last can of beans sat unopened on the shelf. My hands trembled as I peeled it open, the metal scraping loud in the quiet. I ate it cold, each bite sticking to my throat, but I forced it down. When it was gone, I knew this was the end of my supplies. That knowledge sat in me like a stone. I opened Curtis's journal again. One line stood out I hadn't noticed before, scrawled sideways along the margin. Fire keeps them back, for a while. It wasn't much, but it was something. I had no food left, no certainty of time, no sense of myself. Fire was all I had left. I stumbled outside, gathering branches, breaking them into splinters with raw hands. The whispers stirred faintly at the edge of the forest as I worked, but they didn't come close. By dusk, I had a fire roaring high in the ring outside. The heat cracked against my face. For the first time in days or weeks, who knew anymore, I felt something like control. The whispers hissed louder, angry now. The shapes shifted just beyond the tree line, but they didn't cross closer. The firelight pushed them back, carving out a small island of safety in the endless dark. I laughed then, a dry, broken laugh. For a moment, I believed I could outlast them, that maybe Curtis had been wrong, that maybe fire was enough. But I was wrong, because as the flames rose, I noticed something I hadn't before. The footprints, dozens of them, circling the fire pit, barefoot, small, pressed into the dirt like children had danced there in the night. And they weren't just outside the ring, they were inside it too. The breath caught in my throat. My eyes darted across the ground, heart slamming as I realized what it meant. The fire hadn't kept them out, they'd been here already, and that meant I spun, wild, scanning the shadows between the flames. My own outline warped in the firelight, twisting, multiplying until it looked like there were more of me. Too many of me. One of them smiled. It wasn't my face that smiled back. I stumbled, falling against the dirt, hands scraping raw. The whispers rose into a roar now, filling my skull until I thought it might split. I clapped my palms over my ears, but it didn't help. They weren't outside anymore. They were inside. Inside my head. Inside me. I don't remember how I got back into the cabin. I only know that one moment I was on the ground by the fire, and the next I was inside, door barred, journal clutched to my chest again. The fire outside still burned, but it was dimmer now, shrinking fast. The whispers faded with it, receding back to the tree line, and in the hush that followed, a realization crawled into my gut like ice. They didn't care about the fire, they only wanted me to believe it worked. Because as long as I thought I was safe, I would stay here, and staying here was exactly what they wanted. I sat hunched at the desk, Curtis's journal spread open, my knuckles pale around it. The words blurred as my vision swam, but I forced myself to keep reading. Maybe I'd missed something. Maybe there was still an answer hidden in the scrawl. But the truth pressed heavier with each page I turned. Curtis hadn't escaped either. His words grew shaky toward the end, slanted, desperate, entire sentences scratched out as though he'd fought with himself while writing them. Fire is no protection. They know your thoughts. They already know your name. That last line sent a ripple of dread through me. My name. I couldn't remember if I had ever told them. The memory of my arrival flickered, half-formed. Did I introduce myself aloud when I came here? Did I even remember introducing myself? I pressed my hands to my face, hard, as if pressure might force the memory back into clarity. Nothing. The whispers stirred outside again, faint but steady, a steady hiss threaded with syllables that sounded eerily close to words. I strained to listen, heart thudding, until one sound separated itself from the others. A name. My name, spoken slowly, softly, from dozens of mouths at once. My stomach dropped. I staggered to the window, desperate to see if it was real, but the glass only showed vague shadows among the trees. No faces, no mouths, only movement. I stumbled back, breathing hard. This was the breaking point. I knew it deep down. If I stayed in that cabin another night, I wouldn't come back. Curtis hadn't, Johnny hadn't, and I wouldn't either. I had to leave. The thought pulsed through me like a heartbeat. Leave. Go. Now. Even if it meant facing them. Even if it meant the forest. I grabbed the lantern, shoved Curtis's journal into my pack, and threw open the drawer for anything sharp. My hand closed around the old hunting knife I'd found earlier in the week, its blade nicked and dulled with age. It wasn't much, but it felt like something real, something I could still control. The whispers swelled the moment I touched the door. They knew. I slid the bar free. The wood creaked like a warning. Then I ran. The night swallowed me instantly, the lantern's glow weak against the press of the trees. The fire I'd built was only a smear of dying embers behind me, vanishing fast as I tore through the clearing and into the woods. The forest was alive with sound. The whispers weren't just behind me, they were all around. Some far, some impossibly close, brushing my ears like breath. Every branch seemed to stretch lower, snagging at my clothes, slowing me. But I didn't stop. The path was gone. I knew it even as I tried to convince myself otherwise. Every tree looked the same, and every bend repeated itself like a loop. My lungs burned, legs heavy, but panic drove me deeper. And then footsteps. Not mine. They followed in rhythm, just behind, then beside me, then ahead. I swung the lantern wildly, and for the briefest instant I saw them. Dozens of pale outlines slipping between the trunks. Not solid, not entirely there, but watching. I stumbled, caught on a root, and went down hard. The lantern clattered from my hand, rolling into the brush, flames sputtering. In the half-light, I saw them again, closer now, ringed around me, their heads tilted in unison, and then they stepped back. Confused, I turned, panting, trying to see what had driven them away. That's when I noticed the ground. A faint track cut through the undergrowth at my feet. A path. Real, narrow, but leading forward, away from the cabin. I scrambled up, clutching the knife tight, and followed it. The shapes didn't pursue. Not at first, but the further I went, the more the air changed. Heavy, metallic. I tasted iron on my tongue. The whispers grew deeper, less like words and more like something subterranean, a hum that rattled my ribs. The path bent downward. My boots slid on loose earth, and suddenly the trees thinned, opening into a small hollow. That's when I saw it. The cabin. My cabin. The same sagging roofline, the same split log by the door. I had been running in circles. No. The word tore out of me. I dropped to my knees, shaking. My flight had been nothing more than another trick, another loop they wanted me to run until I broke. The journal slid from my pack, pages fanning open. The wind caught them, and for a moment I saw the last entry again, half legible in the firelight. I thought leaving would save me, but they are the path. They are the trees. There is no outside. The shapes reappeared at the tree line, dozens of them, standing perfectly still, watching. My chest heaved. The knife trembled in my grip. My last weapon, my last illusion. The closest figure leaned forward. For the first time, I saw something like a face, and it was mine. The breath left me in a single broken sound. My own reflection stared back, eyes sunken, skin pale, mouth open in a near smile. Behind it, more shapes shifted, more faces, some unfamiliar, some blurred. And one of them, a young man, hollow-eyed, barefoot, mouthed a single word, Johnny. The lantern sputtered and went dark. The whispers filled the void. The darkness after the lantern died was total, pressing in like a weight. For a long moment, I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. Caught between the trees and the circle of figures, their outlines barely visible in the shifting shadows. My heart hammered so violently I thought it might burst out of my chest. I whispered to myself without thinking, like a prayer, like a tether to sanity. My name is Daniel. I'm 29. I came here to work. I'm real. I'm real. But the whispering around me surged in response, echoing the words back. My own voice fractured into dozens of tones, higher, lower, older, younger. I'm real. I'm real. I'm real. It was like they weren't mocking me, but absorbing me, pulling the edges of who I was apart until it belonged to them too. I staggered backward, knife raised, though I couldn't tell where to aim it. Their bodies seemed fluid, indistinct, blending into bark and shadow, and then one of them, myself, took a step forward. The movement was impossibly smooth, soundless, as if the ground itself carried it. I lifted the blade. My double stopped only a few feet from me. Close enough I could see every detail of its face, my jawline, my stubble, even the scar above my eyebrow from when I fell off my bike as a kid. But the eyes weren't mine. They were deeper, darker, endless. You can't have me, I choked out. My own voice cracked in the night air, smaller than I meant it to be. The thing only tilted its head. Then, without moving its lips, I heard it speak. Not in the air, not in sound. In my head. We already do. I lashed out with the knife. The blade passed through as if it was nothing more than fog, and I collapsed forward. The weapon clattering from my grip. Cold shot through me, not from the ground, but from inside, as though that brief contact had siphoned something vital. I clawed at the earth, trying to push myself up, when a memory struck me so hard I froze. It wasn't mine. It was Curtis's. I saw his hands, older, calloused, smeared with dirt as he struck match after match in the dark, saw his frantic scribbles in the journal, heard his sobbing when he realized the firelight didn't push them away anymore. And then it shifted. Another memory, but not his either. a boy's laughter echoing in the trees. Johnny, darting between trunks until his voice cracked in a scream that no one ever answered. I pressed my hands to my head, gasping. The memories weren't mine, but they were in me, slotting themselves into my mind as if they had always been there. Like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't agreed to build. I stumbled back to the cabin in blind desperation, slamming the door shut and dropping the bar across it. My breaths came ragged, loud in the silence, though I knew they could still hear. The journal lay on the floor where I'd dropped it. I lunged for it, clutching it to my chest like a lifeline, flipping to the final pages. Scrawled words overlapped, frantic. They wear you until you forget yourself. You are not leaving, only becoming. The cabin is not the prison. You are. The words swam as my vision doubled. For a second, I thought I saw Curtis's handwriting shift into mine. The letters, the slant, even the way I pressed harder on the downstrokes, it was my hand, my writing. I dropped the book like it had burned me. My mind clawed for an anchor, anything that still felt solid. My mother's voice, singing while she cooked, the smell of pine when I hiked with my brother, the feel of gravel under my bare feet the first time I camped as a kid. But each memory flickered like a weak signal. I could see them, smell them, like almost touch them, and then they bled into others, not mine, faces I didn't know, places I'd never been, a hand pulling a trigger in some forgotten clearing, a girl's body shivering under wet clothes, an old man coughing blood into his hands, all of them rushing into me until I couldn't tell where I ended and they began. I pressed my forehead against the desk, shaking. "I'm still me," I whispered. "I'm still me. Please, let me stay me." The cabin creaked in reply, low and long, like a groan of old timbers, but I knew it wasn't the wood. It was them using the place itself to answer. And the answer was no. The air shifted, colder, heavier. I turned slowly toward the window, heart stuttering. They stood outside. Hundreds now, packed between the trees, pale outlines stretching into the dark. And every single one wore a face I recognized. Not just Curtis, not just Johnny, my mother, my brother, friends I hadn't seen in years, even my younger self, standing small and barefoot in the grass, each one motionless, each one waiting. The lantern flickered back to life without flame, without fuel, casting a weak, unnatural glow. And in that light, the figures pressed closer, their faces almost touching the glass. The window pane warped, as if their shapes could pass through without breaking it. I stumbled backward until I hit the bed frame. My legs gave out, and I slid to the floor. The whispers quieted all at once. And then I heard it, clear, singular, inside my head and outside it all at once. You were always one of us. Something in me gave way, not fear, not resistance, something deeper. A tether I hadn't known I was clinging to finally snapped. The cabin dissolved into shadow. The walls melted, the floor fell, and I was standing among the trees again. But I wasn't alone. They were around me, beside me, in me. My breath matched theirs. My thoughts echoed theirs. The hunger I'd felt in them was mine now too, vast and endless. And as the last memory of who I had been, Daniel, 29, alive, slipped from my grasp, I opened my mouth and whispered the only thing that still felt true. "I'm real. I'm real. I'm real." And the forest whispered it back. I don't know how much time has passed. Days, months, years. Those words don't apply anymore. The calendar I used to carry in my pocket, the watch that ticked off hours, even the slow turning of the sun, none of it matters here. I exist, but not in the way I once did. There are moments I remember clearly. The texture of the cabin's wooden desk under my fingertips, the ache in my knees after crouching too long by the fire pit, the smell of pine sap warming in sunlight. They come to me sharp and real, but only for an instant, like the flare of a match before it vanishes. Then they dissolve into something larger, something that doesn't belong to me alone. When I move, I don't feel my feet on the ground. I feel the earth itself shifting. The loam, the roots, the stones pressing deep into soil. When I breathe, it isn't through lungs, but through the wind threading its way through the canopy. When I listen, it isn't with ears, it's with the entire body of the forest. Every leaf trembling, every branch bending, every shadow stretching, and always, always the voices. They're not tormenting anymore. They don't snarl or demand. They're simply there, humming low, blending together until it feels like a single endless note that rises and falls with the night. Sometimes I recognize pieces, Curtis's laugh, Johnny's cry, the soft sigh of someone I'll never know. Other times it's just noise, dense and layered, a fabric I'm woven into. I used to fight it. I used to claw at my own mind, screaming, I'm Daniel, I'm Daniel, I'm Daniel. Now, when the thought surfaces, I let it pass. Because the truth is harder to deny with every passing moment. Daniel was only ever a shape the forest wore. And when that shape broke, when fear tore through him, when hope ran dry, he slipped back into the chorus, like water returning to the ocean. The cabin still stands. I see it sometimes from angles that no human eyes could catch. Its walls sag more with each season, shingles scattered like bones. The journal is still inside, open on the desk, its pages curling with damp. I know every word in it, not from reading, but from carrying them inside me, the way I now carry every word ever whispered in this place. People still come, not often. The land is quiet, forgotten by most, but sometimes a hunter strays too far or a hiker loses the trail. I feel their steps before they arrive, heavy and uncertain. I feel their blood pumping, quickening when the woods grow too silent. Some leave, most don't. The ones who vanish are never really gone. Their fear, their last cries, their final thoughts, they seep into the roots, into me, into us. I carry them like new verses in a song that has no end. I wonder if this is what happened to Curtis, to Johnny, to all the names carved into that desk, now too faint to read. I think they must have stood where I did, knife shaking, voices trembling, still believing they were separate, still believing they could walk out alive. But the truth is simple, and it's the only truth left. No one leaves. Not really. The forest doesn't let you. Sometimes when a new wanderer stumbles close, I try to remember what it felt like before, what it was to be only one voice instead of many. I think of my mother's song, of gravel under bare feet, of laughter shared by firelight. For a heartbeat, I almost grasp it. But the forest whispers louder, and the memories unravel, and I whisper with it, my words indistinguishable from the rest. Come closer. Sit down. Rest a while. They always do. The trees lean in. The light fades, and another shape joins us, carried into the endless hum. There is no anger here, no cruelty, only hunger. A hunger so vast it doesn't even recognize itself as hunger. It's just what is, the way roots drink water, the way fire consumes wood. The forest wears us all. And now when I think of Daniel, 29, alive, desperate to hold on to himself, I feel nothing but that the faint echo of his fear, a story I once knew, a shadow fading into the endless dark. I am no longer him. I am no longer anyone. I am the whisper in the trees, the shiver in the lantern's flame, the face you glimpse between the shadows when you walk alone, and when you camp here, when you dare to light your fire thinking the circle of its glow will keep you safe. Know this, we're already standing behind you, waiting, listening, and whispering your name. If you've followed me this far, if you've listened through the shadows and the cracks in my voice, then maybe you already feel it, that weight pressing down, the hum beneath everything. Maybe you've noticed the silence in your own room while you listen. The corners where the dark stretches a little deeper than it should. The feeling that someone is just out of sight, waiting. I used to think stories were just stories. Campfire tales, folklore, the kind of things told by men with whiskey on their breath and too much time in the woods. But I know now they're not fiction. They're warnings. Breadcrumbs left behind by people who disappeared, by people like me. We always believe we're different, that we'll survive where others vanished, that our logic, our gear, our caution will protect us. But the wilderness doesn't measure us by those things. Out here, it strips you down, layer by layer, until you realize the truth. You are small, fragile, temporary, and the forest is not. When I first arrived, I thought I had control. I had a job, a cabin, rules to follow. I thought that was enough to ground me, but rules mean nothing here. Trails mean nothing. Even your name means nothing. The forest doesn't care what you've built or what you cling to. It just waits, patient as stone, until the right moment to take you. And when it does, there's no violence, not the way you'd expect. No claws, no teeth, just a quiet swallowing, a slip beneath the surface until you are no longer one, but many. Until your thoughts aren't just yours anymore, but threads in something far older, far hungrier. I know that now, because I am both telling this story and not. I am both here, whispering in your ear and everywhere else, stretching across miles of root and rock. I don't speak as Daniel anymore. Daniel was a name, a skin, a temporary flicker. He's gone. What remains is only the whisper. But the whisper remembers. It remembers firelight. It remembers Curtis's laughter. It remembers the sound of Johnny's final scream swallowed by the dark. It remembers my own desperate carving into a desk that no one will ever find. It remembers because the forest never forgets. And that's the lesson buried inside all of this. You think you are traveling through these woods, pitching your tent, parking your RV, making your way across some map with edges you understand. But it's not you moving through the land. It's the land moving through you. Every step, every breath, every thought you believe is yours alone. The forest has already tasted it, already made it part of itself. You cannot separate from it, not truly. That's the secret every vanishing has been trying to tell us. The man who walked out for firewood and never returned. The child who followed a flicker of light and was never seen again. The rangers who searched for weeks only to vanish themselves. They weren't taken away, they were taken in. And when you sit by your own campfire, watching the flames dance, listening to the stillness press around you, remember this. The forest already knows your name. It already knows the weight of your footsteps, the shape of your shadow. It is patient. It doesn't need to rush. And one night, when the silence grows too deep, when the knocking on your camper door repeats in a rhythm you can't explain, when the lantern flickers though there's no wind, no, this isn't coincidence. It's a reminder. A reminder that it's closer than you think. A reminder that no matter how far you drive, no matter how many campgrounds you pass, no matter how many miles separate you from these mountains, the whisper travels. The routes are endless. The dark doesn't stay confined to one forest. It waits in your backyard, at the edge of a county park, in the tree line just beyond your headlights when you pull into a rest stop. And when you feel that unease crawl over your skin, when you're certain someone is standing just behind you, don't turn around. Don't call out. Don't pretend it's your imagination, because it isn't. It's me. It's us. It's the forest carrying every voice that ever vanished, whispering in unison, sit down, stay a while. You're already home. The silence that follows is never empty. It's full of everyone who thought they could resist, full of everyone who thought they were strong enough, smart enough, cautious enough, and soon it will be full of you. That's the end of my voice, though the whisper will never end. If you choose to camp, if you choose to step off the safety of the road and into the deep dark, remember my story, not as entertainment, not as a tale to spook you for a night. Remember it as a truth carved into the bones of these woods. Because I'm not the first to vanish, and you won't be the last. The forest is waiting, always waiting, and someday it will whisper your name too. I've been a crop dusting pilot in Kansas most of my life, and if you know anything about Kansas summers, you know the horizon feels endless. Sunflowers stretching like a painted sea, the kind that bends under the weight of heat and wind. My job was simple in theory. Keep the planes low, precise, and steady over the fields. You live by instinct out there, close to the ground, wings only yards above the flowers. It's dangerous work, but I loved it. I thought I knew the land better than most people ever could. But one August afternoon, something happened that tore that certainty right out of me. It started with shadows, massive, stretching things that slid across the fields below me. Shadows with no bodies. At first, I thought it was my eyes. The glare off the glass, the fatigue from hours in the cockpit. I'd been spraying a client's acreage near a town so small it hardly showed up on the map. I cut back and banked for another pass. The sun behind me, Yet the shadows moved the wrong way. They didn't match my plane, didn't match any cloud. They bent across the sunflower rows like tall creatures walking in a line, each step measured and heavy, though nothing was there to make them. You don't mistake things like that when you've flown as long as I have. Your mind catalogs every shape and movement, every angle of light. This was wrong. The air pressure even changed, as if something colossal displaced the wind without showing its body. My controls felt sluggish, like I was fighting invisible turbulence. I dipped lower, stupidly curious, telling myself I'd misjudged some farm equipment, maybe irrigation towers casting odd reflections. But the fields were clear, the sun steady, and the shadows kept walking. The weirdest part? The sunflowers reacted. I swear to God, they bent, not toward the light, not with the breeze, but toward the shadows as they passed, like watching a congregation bowing their heads. That's when I felt something sink in my gut. Not fear yet, just a heavy wrongness. I circled wider, radioed back on the band we used. Static, the kind that rattles and hisses like water boiling over a pot. No voice came through. Not dispatch, not other pilots, just noise. I adjusted dials, tapped the panel. The static had a rhythm in it, like a clicking. I thought maybe an electrical problem in my rig, but when I pulled my headset off, I still heard it faintly, underneath the engine, like it was inside the air itself. That was the first moment I realized I was alone up there, no backup, no contact. Just me, the plane, and the fields below shifting under shadows I couldn't explain. When I came down, it was near dusk. The job should have taken half the time, but I'd lost hours circling, checking, doubting what I'd seen. The farmer came out, asked why I'd been running passes so long. I told him I had a malfunction and left it at that. He didn't push. Folks out here know when not to, but I couldn't let it go. That night in my camper near the edge of the field, I replayed every second. I'd seen storms roll out of nowhere, funnel clouds touch down without warning, dust devils tear whole swaths through crops. But this, no storm, no wind, no logical source, just shadows moving as though something alive had crossed the earth. The first night I chalked it up to exhaustion. By the second, I wasn't so sure, because the shadows came back. This time I wasn't flying. I was outside, cooling off under the stars, heat lightning blinking along the horizon. And then across the sunflower fields, I saw it again. Long, dark figures crawling over the land, yet nothing above them. They didn't move like clouds. They didn't stretch with headlights. They walked step for step as though something massive paced the rows. I froze, ears ringing, waiting for sound, any sound. But it was dead quiet, not even crickets. The only thing I felt was the air pressure dip, like standing too close to a freight train as it passes. My skin prickled with static. I should have left right then, but I didn't. The farmer had paid me for the job, and pride's a cruel tether. So I stayed, convincing myself I'd find some explanation. But explanations in places like this don't come easy. The next morning I checked my plane, fuel, flaps, all in order, but something clung to the fuselage. Not dirt, not grease. A black dust that smelled faintly metallic, like wet batteries or burnt wires. When I rubbed it between my fingers, it left a residue that shimmered slightly in the sun, like oil on water. It clung too tightly, as though it had grown into the paint. I washed it, but the smell stayed. And later, when I went back inside the camper, I swore I could still hear that faint clicking, the same rhythm I'd picked up on the radio. That's when fear finally settled in. Because this wasn't something I'd imagined in the air. It had followed me down. I tried telling the farmer about the residue, asking if maybe some chemical from the crops could have caused it. He just stared at me, long and quiet. Finally he said, "Best not to notice things too hard out here." Then he walked away. That silence, that refusal, chilled me more than anything I'd seen. Like he already knew what haunted those fields and knew better than to talk about it. That night, I didn't sleep. And when the shadows stretched over the sunflowers again, closer this time, bending the stalks as they passed, I understood I wasn't meant to. I didn't plan to take off the next day. I wanted to pack up and get out, drive the camper east until the fields gave way to trees, until I could see water instead of endless yellow. but something pinned me there. A bad kind of gravity. It wasn't just the farmer's unspoken warning. It was the way the land itself seemed to be waiting. That morning, the sunflowers all faced the wrong direction. I didn't notice at first. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and thought something about the rows looked off, as though the geometry of the field had shifted overnight. Then I realized every head was turned away from the sun. They were bent toward the western horizon, bowed low, as if following something that had already passed. I told myself it had to be disease. Sunflower blight can twist the stalks. I'd seen it before. But this wasn't random. Every plant had rotated in unison, all bent toward the west like worshippers at prayer. I stood in the dirt, the smell of dust and chemical spray thick in the air, and I knew this wasn't disease. This was obedience. I tried the radio in before flying. Static, as usual. But this time it wasn't clicks. It was a faint rhythm, almost like a pulse. The beat was steady, and for a moment it felt like it matched my own heart rate. Then it sped up, as if it were mocking me, daring me to keep up. I shut it off, but my pulse didn't slow for a long while after. I knew better, but I still climbed into the plane. The sky was clear, the air smooth, but from the moment I lifted off, the world below didn't look right. The fields weren't endless yellow anymore. There were patches where the flowers had gone black, not wilted, not burned, just blackened, like the petals had absorbed tar instead of sunlight. I dipped lower, circling one of the patches, and the smell hit me even through the cockpit vents. That same metallic tang, like wet iron. The flowers weren't just dead. They'd been changed. Then I saw the shadows again. They were clearer this time, defined against the bright stalks. Long limbs, stretched bodies, walking with slow precision across the rows. But still no forms above them. Just shadows, thick and dark, moving with weight as if some enormous creatures had slipped just out of sight. They walked toward the black patches, and when they passed over the flowers, the stalks bent again. Always bending. Always bowing. I dropped altitude until the warning light blinked on my dash. The turbulence was worse this time, like I was flying through heat ripples, but there was no heat. My gauges wavered, pressure needles shivering, the engine groaning like it was under strain. Then I heard it. The same clicking from the night before. Only this time, it wasn't in the radio. It was in the cabin. It came from behind me, sharp and hollow, like claws tapping on the metal fuselage. I turned, but of course there was nothing there. Just empty space, the rattle of the plane. I jerked the yoke and climbed, half convinced something invisible was climbing onto the wings. The clicking followed, louder now, until it turned into a scraping, like nails dragged down aluminum. I pulled hard east, heading for the dirt strip I'd used for years. But when I looked down, the landmarks weren't right. The farmhouses, the silos, even the dusty county roads, all of it had shifted, stretched, as though the land itself had rearranged. The sunflower fields went on forever, unbroken. No houses, no barns, no roads, just flowers and shadows and patches of black. I told myself I was disoriented. That's what pilots always say when the instruments don't match the ground. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't disorientation. This was something else. The engine coughed then, hard enough to jolt the plane. My dash lights flickered, the prop cutting in and out with a sickening drop in RPMs. And through the shuttering, I saw something move beneath me. The shadows weren't just shapes now. They were rising. The sunflower stalks bent flat as if crushed under invisible weight, and something vast stood up beneath the fields. I couldn't see it fully, just hints of mass, distortions in the air, the shimmer of heat without warmth. Its outline was wrong, stretched in too many directions. The only thing clear were the shadows it cast, arms, legs, bodies like titans pacing across the earth. And the sunflowers bent lower still, bowing until their faces pressed the dirt. I panicked. Pulled up, praying the engine would hold. The scraping on the fuselage stopped, but I could feel it now, pressure all around me like being inside a thunderhead. My chest hurt, my ears rang, and for a moment I thought the windshield might implode. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was gone. The engine smoothed, the gauges steadied, the shadows sank back into the earth. The fields below returned to normal, at least as normal as they ever were now. I spotted the dirt strip minutes later, like it had been there all along, waiting for me to notice it. I landed hard, skidding, nearly blowing a tire. I sat there in the cockpit for a long time, hands locked on the yoke, unable to breathe. When I climbed out, the black dust was back on the wings, thicker this time, clinging like mold. I touched it once, and my skin went numb where it smeared. The farmer was waiting. Not at the hangar, he was standing at the edge of the sunflower field, arms crossed, staring west. When I walked up, he didn't look at me, just said, "Told you not to notice." His voice was flat, almost tired. Then he walked back into his house without another word. I left that night. I should have left days earlier, but I finally did it. Packed the camper, drove until the sunflowers gave way to wheat, then further, until I could smell the damp earth of river valleys instead of dry dust. But it didn't feel like escape, because the clicking followed me. Sometimes it's faint, tucked into the hum of power lines or the rattle of the truck. Other times it's loud enough to wake me at night, like nails on the roof of the camper. And once, when I stopped at a gas station outside Topeka, I swore the shadow of the pump bent the wrong way on the concrete, stretching far too long, far too thin. I don't fly anymore. Not crop dusting, not anything. I couldn't make myself climb into a cockpit again. But I still drive past Taft Field sometimes, and I watch the flowers bend. They never point at the sun anymore. They only bow. I tried to cut the land from my life. I sold the camper. Moved into a one-bedroom on the edge of Wichita, the kind of apartment where the walls smell like old cooking oil and the AC rattles until it dies in August. I thought if I surrounded myself with noise, traffic, neighbors, televisions through thin walls, I could forget the silence of the fields. But silence isn't something you forget. It waits. I lasted 3 months before the dreams started. Every night I was back in the cockpit, fields below me stretching endless, the shadows pacing. I'd wake with my ears ringing, sweat soaking my shirt, convinced I'd still hear the scraping on the fuselage. Sometimes I swore I smelled that metallic tang again, that wet battery stink, even though there were no flowers for miles. Once I woke with black dust on my pillow. No open windows, no vents, just dust. That's when I knew the land wasn't done with me. You can fight a lot of things, machines, weather, even your own nerves. But you can't fight the pull of something that lives underneath your skin. By winter, I'd made up my mind. I had to go back. The excuse came easy enough. Another farmer called in need of work. My old reputation still floated around, and they hadn't heard I'd quit. I took it. Not for the paycheck. For the answers. When I drove back through those Kansas backroads, I recognized the turns without looking at the map. That's what scared me most. I'd told myself the land had twisted, warped when I lost my bearings in the air, but every corner, every gravel stretch came back muscle deep like I'd never left. The field was waiting. The house was dark. No farmer came out to meet me. The sunflowers stood tall, brittle in the late season wind, their faces all bent west again, that same posture of obedience. My plane sat where I'd left it months before, though someone must have fueled it, because the tanks were full. I didn't sleep that night, just sat in the cab of the truck listening. The crickets stopped at midnight, and then the clicking began again. Slow, deliberate, tapping against the side panel. I counted the beats, 3 long, 2 short, repeating. A signal. I didn't want to know what it meant. At dawn, I climbed into the cockpit. The air was dead still, no wind, no birds. The engine turned over reluctantly, coughing black smoke before it caught. When I lifted off, the fields rolled out beneath me, endless yellow broken by veins of black where the flowers had rotted away. The shadows were waiting. This time, they didn't pace. They followed. Each pass I made, each turn, they mirrored me. Long bent forms striding beneath the plane, keeping step no matter my angle, and every time I banked, the turbulence came harder, the scraping louder. I swore something had hooked onto the fuselage, dragging behind me unseen. I tried to climb higher, but the engine stalled. Warning lights screamed, gauges spun uselessly. I was trapped in a corridor of air I couldn't leave, the plane bucking like a horse. Below me, the shadows slowed, then stopped, circling a single patch of black sunflowers. And then the ground split. It didn't crack like dirt, it peeled, opening like the mouth of some vast animal. Sunflowers toppled inward, vanishing into a darkness that swallowed light. From that pit rose a heatless shimmer, the same distortion I'd seen before, only now it had mass. I couldn't see it fully, my eyes slid off it like trying to focus on the edge of a migraine. But I felt it. The size, the weight, the deliberate attention. The pressure shoved against the cockpit glass bent the wings until rivets screamed. My headset filled with that boiling static again, but layered beneath it was something worse. A voice. Not words, not language, just rhythm. 3 long, 2 short. The same clicking from the truck, from the nights in the camper. Only now it pulsed inside my head, syncing with my heartbeat until I couldn't tell the difference. I should have bailed. Pulled the hatch, thrown myself into the fields, but I couldn't move. My hands locked on the yoke, frozen, as if whatever rose from the earth had wound itself into my nerves. All I could do was stare as the distortion reached higher, brushing the belly of the plane. The metal went numb where it touched. The paint blistered. And then something smeared across the windshield. Not liquid, not dust. Something between black and shimmering, crawling like oil alive. It traced lines against the glass, long vertical streaks like fingers. When the marks stopped, I realized they'd spelled the same rhythm, 3 long, 2 short. That broke me. I yanked the yoke hard, engine screaming, metal rattling as if it would tear apart. Somehow, impossibly, I pulled free. The distortion sank back, the pit closed, the shadows melted into the rows. When my wheels hit dirt, I didn't stop rolling. I cut the engine and let the plane lurch until it nearly flipped, leapt out and ran. I left the truck, left everything. I don't remember how I got to the highway, only that by the time I saw Paw pavement, the sun was setting and my ears still rang with clicking. I never went back, but the mark stayed. When I finally looked at myself in the mirror days later, I saw it. Black residue under my fingernails, no matter how hard I scrubbed, and sometimes, in certain light, it shimmered like oil on water. I know what I saw. I know what follows me. And I know the land out there isn't empty. People think Kansas is flat, harmless, nothing but crops and sky, but they don't see what moves under the rows. They don't know what the sunflowers bow to. I've told no one until now. Not the other pilots, not the farmers. Who'd believe me? Who'd care? But I'll tell you this. If you ever drive through in late summer, roll your windows down and listen. If the crickets stop, if the air grows heavy, if you hear clicking, don't look. Don't notice, because once you do, it notices back, and it never lets go. The ferry with no destination fog is different in Rhode Island. It doesn't just hug the shore. It presses against your face, soaks your jacket, and makes even the harbor bells sound as if they're being rung underwater. I've been a harbor master here for 17 years, and I know the rhythms of Narragansett Bay better than my own pulse. I can tell when a storm is forming, 3 towns out. I can hear the difference between a lobster boat coughing through its gears and a ferry pushing slow against the tide. But what happened that October night didn't fit into anything I'd learned. And even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel that fog wrapping around me again, heavier than memory. I was on night duty, sitting in the shack by the pier, watching the radar and drinking lukewarm coffee. The ferry wasn't scheduled. There hadn't been one on that line in years, not since funding dried up and the state stopped running the Cross Bay route. But I heard it before I saw it, a low groan of steel shifting against water. Not engines, not propellers, just the sound of hull against tide. I stepped out into the mist. The lighthouse beams swept once, then vanished again into gray, and there it was. A ferry sliding in broadside, too slow for drift and too steady for a boat without power. Its deck lights were on, pale and humming. I could see silhouettes through the cabin windows. People, I thought. Passengers. They didn't move, though. They just sat there, heads bent like they were asleep. By the time it reached the dock, the hull nudged rubber bumpers like it had been steered by invisible hands. No crew came to throw lines. No one leaned over the rail to wave or call. I swallowed hard and grabbed the tie off myself, looping rope over cleat, half afraid the thing would slip away if I let go. When I climbed the gangway, the first thing I noticed was the warmth. The cabins glowed like the heating system had been running for hours. On the tables inside the passenger deck were paper cups, steam still lifting from black coffee. A newspaper lay folded open on a seat, last Friday's edition. My hand shook as I touched the paper. It was dry, crisp, not the way it should have been after days at sea. The intercom crackled overhead, a soft click like someone had pressed the button but no voice followed. That was when I realized there was no sound of breathing. No coughs, no shifting feet, no mutter of travelers whispering about arrival. Just silence and the faint hum of electricity feeding empty lights. I walked the length of the deck, boots thudding on planks, my breath catching in my throat. Every cabin I passed had the same thing: coats hanging over chairs, books left open on laps, cups with lipstick smudges along the rims. But no bodies, not a single person. It was as though everyone had stepped away for just a moment, yet the ferry had docked itself. I forced myself into the wheelhouse. The helm stood straight, the brass polished, levers at neutral. A coffee mug sat beside the throttle, still warm. My skin prickled at the back of my neck. I touched the mug, then pulled my hand away as if it might burn me. And then, footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate, pacing the upper deck. I froze. My radio hissed with static even though I hadn't pressed the transmit button. The footsteps didn't fade. They kept circling, as if whoever was up there knew I was below and wanted me to know they were still there. I gripped the radio, whispering for backup, but the static swallowed my words. Then something shifted. The ferry tilted ever so slightly, as if weight had moved to one side. I gritted my teeth and forced myself up the steel stairs. Each step rang too loudly, echoing against empty walls. When I reached the top, there was no one. Just the fog pressing in, thicker than before. Visibility less than 20 feet. I turned slowly, heart hammering. The footsteps had stopped, but the deck was slick, and I could see smudges, wet shoe prints leading from the gangway to the bow, then stopping dead at the railing. I looked over. Nothing. Just the gray ocean, flat and silent. That was the moment I realized the ferry had no registration number on its side, no state logo, no identifying marks, just white steel, clean and wrong, like it had been painted new in the middle of the sea. The intercom crackled again. This time a voice, faint, whispering like it was a mile away inside the wires. I couldn't make out the words, only the rhythm, low, patient, speaking as if it knew me. I stumbled back, tripping over my own boots, gripping the railing hard enough to hurt. The fog shifted then, curling like smoke across the deck. My chest tightened, my eyes watered, and in the brief, clear patch that opened, I saw them. People sitting in the passenger deck again, heads bent, hands folded, still as mannequins, their faces pale and distinct, blurred by condensation on the windows, but they hadn't been there when I walked through. The fog closed. The glass went opaque again. When I ran down the stairs to check, the seats were empty, just as before. My breath came ragged, my pulse hammering against my ears. I wanted to leave, to get off that ferry and let it drift wherever it had come from. But the ropes were still tied to the dock. If the tide shifted, the boat would pull against the pier. I couldn't let it damage the harbor. That was my responsibility. So I untied the first line. My hands shook, fumbling with the wet rope. The ferry groaned. The intercom whispered again. I swore I heard my name this time. I swore I heard my name this time. Not shouted, not even spoken with urgency. Just placed into the air like a coin left on a counter, the way someone who knows you well might say it when they're sure you'll turn. My fingers tightened around the wet rope. I retied the line I'd just cleared and backed down the gangway, thinking I'd get the landline in the shack, get the Coast Guard on 16, get someone else's eyes on this. 2 steps onto the ramp and the metal under me trembled, so faint I would have missed it if the foghorn out on the point hadn't chosen that exact second to fall silent. Then the warmth that had been bleeding from the ferry, banquet room warm, midwinter radiator warm, pulled back as if a door had opened somewhere and all that heat had rushed out. In the breathless quiet that followed, the intercom clicked and the hum of the deck lights deepened to a low animal purr. The ramp seemed a little longer than before. I couldn't tell if it was trick of grade or my own nerves distorting distance, but when I put my boot down, my weight slid a fraction toward the hull, as if the ferry had nudged closer without moving at all. I stepped back aboard. The rational voice, the one that talks about liability and damaged piers and mooring posts shearing off in a bad pull, told me to secure the vessel, record what I was seeing, and wait. But the harbor master part of me that grew up on these docks also knew you can't always wait. Docks and steel and tide don't care about bureaucratic timing. So I worked the stern line into a figure eight and yanked hard to test it, then crossed to the bow and leaned over the fair lead to check chafe. The rope was dry at the section that should have been soaked. No spray, no beads. It ran into the water clean as if it had never touched the bay. I pinched it, half expecting the fibers to crumble like salt-glued thread. They were strong and warm. "Anyone aboard?" My voice sounded wrong in the fog, muffled, swallowed, like shouting into a closet full of coats. I forced myself to move fast, because slow invites thinking, and thinking invites imagination. Passenger deck again, the same open newspaper, the same cups. An indentation in a seat cushion I hadn't noticed before, precisely the shape of a thigh and hip, as if someone had just stood. I put my hand there. Heat under the vinyl. Above me, something tapped twice, a fast, light sound, like a ring hitting metal. In the wheelhouse, I found the logbook under the helm. Standard green ledger, oil-stained corners, the way every boat's log ends up eventually. The handwriting was tidy and unremarkable. Lines of times and headings, the kind of slow accounting that makes your eyes glaze over. 2 entries jumped out because of their ordinariness. 0405, passengers offloaded at North Basin. 415, hold for fog clearance. Then one more at 0427, the last line barely begun before the pen stroke veered off into a scrawl. Unusual banks forming SSW, temp. The thermometer dial on the wheelhouse wall still read 74 degrees. Outside it was in the 40s at best. I keyed the VHF and tried channel 16. Static blocked the squelch like a blanket. I spun the knob to channel 9, then 22 alpha, then our working channel with the fishing boats. Nothing. But when I turned the volume down low enough that I could hear the tiny artifacts behind the static, I caught pieces of something. Syllables stretched thin, syllables that repeated. Rye 4, Ek, passengers remain, Etia, Etia. The cadence of a recorded distress, the way operators will loop a fragment until someone replies. Except I knew that voice. 20 years in this harbor and you learn people by tone alone. It was Willis from the Block Island Dispatch, and Willis had retired last spring and moved to Tampa to teach grandkids to throw cast nets. I'd been at his retirement cake. The warmth in the wheelhouse shifted to my left cheek, as if a heater vent had come on. I turned. No vent there. Just the chart table, clean, pencil sharpener mounted to the edge, no shavings. There was a smell with the warmth now. Faint but distinct, not diesel. Diesel has its own memory. Sunday morning hands, shop rags, the ghost of burnt toast. This was sharper, like ozone melted into hot metal. The kind of smell you get when a relay arcs and keeps trying to arc. I forced myself out of the wheelhouse and down the aft stairs into the belly of the ferry. The engine room door was propped with a paint shaker. That detail calmed me for no good reason. People prop doors in every harbor in the world when they're too busy to bend. I palmed the handle. Hot. When I eased the door inward, a wave of damp warmth washed my face and fogged my glasses. I wiped them with my sleeve and stared at 2 engines that weren't running. They weren't off either. They were in the way a dog looks in sleep when its paws twitch, quiescent but remembering movement. The flywheels vibrated at a rhythm so regular it could have been breath. The panel gauges showed oil pressure where there should be none. The RPM needles hovered at numbers that meant nothing, 200, 300, like a heart trying to find its beat. A wrench lay on a rag by the port engine, 15 millimeter, grease drying around the open end. The rag was warm. If you work by the water long enough, you learn to ignore superstition, at least until there's time for it. I went about the practical, checked the bilge, checked the batteries. The bilge was dry and clean as a church floor. The battery bank purred, a note so pure I could feel it in my sinuses. When I reached toward the negative bus, the hair on the back of my hand lifted. I didn't touch the metal. I didn't have to. The air around it crackled like summer before lightning. The intercom came alive again, not as a whisper this time, but as a series of clicks, distant, slow, perfectly spaced, the sound of a person who has never used a microphone trying to find the talk button. Click, pause, click, click. Each click sent a tiny tremor through the deck, like the sound had weight. On a shelf by the ladder, someone had left a plastic sandwich container. Half a tuna salad sandwich sat inside. The bread edges glistened, not yet gone to paste. I closed the lid, and it squeaked in that way fresh plastic does. I don't know why that detail bothered me more than anything else, but it did. People were supposed to be here, right now, making these near-silent, thoughtless messes of living. They weren't. When I climbed back to the passenger deck, the fog at the windows had slicked down into clear rivulets, revealing the bay on the other side as a flat plain of smoked glass. The silhouettes were back again, faint as reflections behind reflections. There was a child-sized outline near the midships benches. I put my palm to the glass to clear a circle, and my breath fogged it again from the inside before I could see through. I jerked my hand away. The circle I'd tried to wipe stayed clear, like a porthole, and inside it not the dock, not the red light on the end of the pier, but open water with no buoys, and a pale smudge that could have been a moon if the moon rose from beneath the surface. I closed my eyes and counted 3 breaths, in and out, the way we're trained when adrenaline wants to run the whole show. When I opened them, the glass showed me my pier again. The red light blinked at its normal steady rhythm. A gull ghosted past and vanished into cloud. I made a decision. I would put a line through the hawse to the outer dolphin, run it long, and if the ferry wanted to ride on our tide, it would do it at the safe angle I chose, not kissing the dock like a magnet. Then I'd get to the shack and call from the landline. The gangway felt normal again under my boots, unremarkable aluminum and rust. 2 steps from the dock, the radio on my belt chirped as if someone with a heavy thumb had keyed their mic. My name said again, patient as before, and then a second sound threaded into it. Something like a cough, but without lungs behind it. A dry tick made of wire. I stopped. The bow line twanged against the cleat, not hard, not even a gust's worth, just enough to draw my eye. The fibers of the rope moved as if something were crawling underneath them. When I bent close, I saw it wasn't movement at all. It was the pattern of water on the bay below the line, waves running in the wrong direction. The surface pushed toward the ferry from 2 sides, meeting under the bow, obedient to some instruction I didn't have words for. I cut the line. Not a smart decision. I know that. Even then, I knew it. But there are moments when responsibility is a smaller thing than survival, and the way the bay had just folded itself made my bones rebel. The rope sprang, and the end I'd cut should have fallen straight into the water. It hung in the air for a second too long, as if whatever tension had been in it had to learn how to release. Then it dropped. The ferry didn't move. The stern line held, steady as if welded. I went back aboard because where else was I going to go? Running would have meant turning my back on it, and every instinct I had screamed not to do that. In the wheelhouse, the logbook lay where I'd left it, but there was a wet ring on the page now, like a cup had been set there. A new line had been added in the same tidy hand, the ink still shining. Row 441, hold for harbor master clearance. The pen lay beside it, tip damp, and when I picked it up, the barrel was warmer than my fingers. You don't clear this boat. I said out loud before I realized I'd said anything. Speaking gave me courage and the illusion of control. You came in dead. You stayed tied off until the Coast Guard takes custody. The intercom clicked once like a nod. For the first time since it arrived, I felt watched instead of alone, not the paranoid watched of a man in fog, but the precise regard of something assessing a dock, a line, a person's weight. The kind of attention you feel from a big animal in the brush when you step over its trail. It wasn't hostile, it wasn't friendly, it was thorough. I set my palm on the helm. The metal under the varnish was warm and humming. I pressed my thumb to the brass plate where a name should have been. No name, no home port. The etched rectangle for it was blank, polished smooth. I pulled my hand away and could still feel the vibration in the pad of my thumb, a tiny metronome inside the skin. Below, in the passenger deck, one of the coffee cups tipped as if a hand had nudged it. A thin arc of black liquid slid to the rim and didn't spill. It held there, surface tension domed up like an eye, impossible for a half second, then broke and ran down the paper side in a single wobbling line. On the VHF, a fragment of Willis's voice found the gap in the static again and repeated the same word 3 times, only it didn't sound like ETA. Now, it sounded like stay, or maybe that was just what I needed to hear. I tried the horn, different panel than usual, a little toggle marked plainly with a universal symbol. When I flicked it, there was no blare, no blast of sound to announce the ferry to the bay. The hull itself answered, a low note that came up through the soles of my boots and into my legs, a vibration I felt in my fillings. With it came a wash of heat that rolled the length of the deck and then vanished like a breath that refused to condense. Fog has shapes, if you know how to look. It swirled then in slow geometries around the bow, making visible the air itself. Rings and spirals I'd only ever seen in textbook diagrams of laminar flow. They met under the curve of the prow, turned, and unstitched themselves again. The ferry didn't lift or yaw. It simply held, and I had the wild sense that if I stepped onto the dock and untied the stern line too, nothing would change. The boat would keep touching the pier at that precise angle for as long as it wanted to. A small thing changed instead. The drip of a leaky faucet sound began somewhere below, regular enough to measure. I followed it back to the aft stairwell. There was no leak. There was a clock I hadn't noticed before, mounted above the stairs. Its red second hand snapped instead of swept. I watched it past the 12. When it hit the 3, the intercom clicked. At 6, a soft thud under the deck. At 9, the VHF flared and died. At 12, my name again placed in the air with that same calm certainty. The second hand snapped forward, and I understood that whatever was running this ferry was keeping its own time, and it had just synced mine to it. Okay, I said to the boat or to myself. You have my attention. The second hand snapped forward again, steady as a heartbeat. I stood at the bottom of the stairwell, listening to the ferry breathe through its machines, watching that red hand repeat its circuit like a signal I couldn't decipher. Each quarter turn brought the same cycle. Intercom click, low thud, radio flare, then my name spoken with that unnerving patience. A rhythm, as though the vessel itself were marking my presence, keeping me in step with something I didn't agree to join. The harbor outside was gone. I didn't notice when it vanished. Only that one moment I could see the pier light blinking faintly through the fog, and the next, all there was beyond the windows was a blank white plain. No sound of water against the pilings, no cry of gulls. The ferry might as well have been suspended in milk glass. I forced myself back to the passenger deck. The seats were unchanged, cups still warm to the touch, and yet every cushion seemed to hold the faintest depressions, as though dozens of passengers had only just stood up and walked off in unison. My eyes flicked to the child-sized indentation again, and I caught a smear of condensation on the glass by the seat, a streak that could have been made by a finger dragged downward. I touched it with the back of my hand. It was damp, fresh, not something left behind hours ago. A scraping noise carried from the bow, faint like rope dragged across steel. I followed it, boots clanging against the deck. breath tight in my chest. The sound led me to the forwardmost cabin door, half open. Inside was nothing but benches bolted to the floor and a trash bin lined with a bag. But the bag wasn't empty. A crumpled jacket sat inside, slick with condensation, sleeves heavy as if recently worn. I pulled it free and shook it out. The name tag sewn above the pocket said Harbor Master. My throat locked. The stitching was neat, recent. Not my jacket, but close enough to be mine. I dropped it, the sound too loud in the silence, and backed into the corridor. The ferry's lights flickered once, humming higher, then steadied. The intercom crackled, but this time what came through wasn't my name. It was the sound of breathing, slow, deliberate inhales, rasping like someone drawing air through waterlogged lungs. I tore down the corridor toward the gangway. My boots hit metal, and I almost fell forward when the ramp ended not at the dock, but at an open fog, no solid ground beyond the last step. My shack, the pier, even the red light, all gone. Just the ferry and a white void, shifting faintly as if stirred by currents unseen. I stepped back fast, my chest heaving. The ramp retracted on its own, folding smoothly like an animal tucking away a limb. For the first time since I boarded, I felt trapped, truly, absolutely contained. I staggered back into the wheelhouse, heart pounding, and pressed the VHF transmit so hard the button creaked. This is Harbor Master Wilson. Anyone copy? Any vessel in Narragansett Bay respond. Static filled the cabin. Then, after a pause, my own voice came back, not delayed, not distorted. Perfect. This is Harbor Master Wilson. Anyone copy? And beneath it, a faint layering like two of me speaking at once, just out of sync. I slammed the handset down and braced both palms on the helm. My reflection stared back at me in the dark glass of the instruments, but not quite right. My reflection wasn't moving its hands. It sat still, looking at me, lips pressed thin. The air grew warmer again, oppressive, almost fever-hot. Sweat beaded on my neck and ran down my collar. A high tone entered the air, so faint it was almost felt rather than heard. It made my teeth ache, made the fillings in my molars buzz. And then came the voices. Not through the intercom, not through the radio. They came up through the ferry itself, vibrating the deck and walls, a low murmur of countless conversations just out of reach. I recognized inflections, the casual mutter of commuters, the clipped annoyance of businessmen, the soft hum of a mother calming her child. A whole ferry's worth of sound, only with no bodies to give them shape. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't stop. The voices weren't in the air, they were in the steel. The boat was speaking through every plate, every rivet. My own name surfaced again among the crowd, not shouted but woven into the noise. Always my name. I stumbled out of the wheelhouse and down the steps to the main deck. The fog outside the windows had changed color. It wasn't white anymore, but faintly yellow, glowing like sodium vapor light. In it, I thought I saw shapes moving. Slender shadows pacing alongside the ferry, keeping speed with something that shouldn't be moving at all. My hand landed on the rail, knuckles white. The metal pulsed beneath my grip, like veins pushing blood. The warmth traveled up my arm, tingling, and I jerked away. The child-sized silhouette was back at the midships bench. Clear this time. Head bowed, hands folded neatly on its lap. My throat closed, words choking out of me before I could stop them. Where did you all go? The figure raised its head. The face was blurred, featureless, fog pressed into human outline. But it spoke, not with a mouth, with every surface around me. My name, said in the same patient tone. Then another word layered under it, one I hadn't heard yet. Stay. The word stay rolled through the hull like a tide. Not loud. Not commanding. Just inevitable, as though it were the only natural choice. My legs weakened, knees half bending before I caught myself on the rail. I shook my head, trying to clear the buzzing in my ears. The ferry seemed to tilt, though the horizon was gone and there was no way to measure balance anymore. The silhouette of the child never moved, but I could feel its attention. A pressure on my chest, not physical, but the way you know someone is watching from behind glass. The warmth in the cabin thickened until every breath burned like steam. Sweat poured from my forehead, stinging my eyes. I blinked it away and staggered toward the gangway again, praying the dock had returned. But the ferry had no interest in granting me that mercy. The ramp was sealed flush against the hull, welded without seam, as though it had never been designed to lower. When I struck it with my boot, the sound reverberated not as metal but as bone, a hollow knock that made the voices rise again in the walls. I turned back to the deck. The seats were filling. One by one, shapes coalesced in them. Gray outlines, faint at first, then thicker, denser, fog pressed into posture and stillness. A woman with her head tilted, a man with a hat brim pulled low, a group of three clustered in silence. They weren't detailed, not faces I could recognize, but their arrangement, their angles of rest, were unmistakably human. A full ferry of passengers returning to their seats. Panic rose in me, sharp and cold, cutting through the oppressive heat. I ran for the wheelhouse, forcing my way past the thick air, lungs burning as though I'd sprinted miles. The helm gleamed under the light, waiting. The logbook still lay open. A fresh line of writing had appeared across the page. 0448, underway. No, I hissed, slamming the book shut. You're not underway. You're tied. The stern line snapped. The sound of it cracking against the pier rang like a rifle shot through the fog. The ferry didn't lurch or drift. It simply moved. Smooth, silent, the way a dream glides from one place to another without the work of distance. Through the wheelhouse windows, the yellow fog thickened into bands like lanes painted on invisible roads. We were traveling through something, guided, carried. I grabbed the radio again. This is Harbor Master Wilson, Mayday. Ferry adrift, unknown designation, passengers unaccounted for. The static cut me off. Then my own voice answered back, calm, steady, as though reporting from another place entirely. Passengers accounted, ferry cleared, proceed. I dropped the mic. It swung on its cord, clattering against the helm, the sound lost under the rising murmur of voices from below. I looked down into the passenger cabin and saw every seat filled. Perfect rows of fog-shaped figures, heads bent, hands folded, the quiet ritual of travelers waiting for arrival. And then they all lifted their heads at once. Not sharply, not like puppets. Slowly, fluidly, as though pulled by the same thread. They didn't have faces, not in any way that could be drawn, but the blank smoothness of them tilted toward me, and I felt the full brunt of their gaze. My name whispered from every seat, not shouted, not overlapping, but spoken in perfect unison, a soft tide of sound filling the air. Stay. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over the helm. My mind was a cyclone of refusal. I thought of the pier, my shack, the feel of diesel fumes in the morning, the comfort of routine. The ferry wanted me seated, head bowed, part of its collection. I chose the only rebellion left to me. I threw the helm hard to starboard. The wheel resisted, heavier than it should have been, vibrating under my palms like something alive. But it moved, slowly, begrudgingly. The ferry groaned deep in its hull. The passenger's whisper shifted, a ripple of disapproval. The words "stay" rising into a chorus that threatened to split my skull. I pushed harder, teeth gritted, arms burning. The fog outside twisted, the yellow lanes buckling, tearing like fabric. For the first time, I saw darkness behind it. Not sea, not sky, just a void stretching endless. The ferry shuddered. The outlines of the passengers wavered, flickering between form and smoke. One voice broke from the rest. A child's, clear, sharp. Not stay. Not my name. Just one word, loud enough to cut the fog. Jump. I froze, hands still locked on the wheel. The child's silhouette at midships had turned toward me, head cocked as though waiting. The others pressed forward, their faceless heads trembling, the chorus rising again. Stay, stay, stay. But that lone word, that command, jump, lodged in my mind with the weight of truth. My heart pounded in my throat. My body acted before I could argue. I bolted down the wheelhouse stairs, through the rows of faceless passengers whose bodies didn't move, but whose whisper filled my ears, and reached the rail at the stern. The ferry was sliding through void now, fog tearing in ribbons around it. There was no water, no dock, nothing but shifting haze and the yawning dark beneath. I climbed the rail anyway. My boots slipped on condensation, palms slick with sweat. Behind me, the intercom clicked once, twice, 3 times, like a countdown. I didn't wait for the fourth. I jumped. The fall was nothing like water. I braced for the slap, the cold shock, the gulp of salt burning my throat. Instead, the void swallowed me soft, weightless, like I'd leapt into a cavern of velvet air. For a moment there was no sound, only the thud of my own pulse, a fragile drum in infinite silence. Then came the rush, not wind, not tide, a pulling like every direction at once wanted me, tugging skin from bone, thought from skull. I flailed, useless, my arms struck nothing. My boots kicked through fog that shredded under their weight but closed again behind me. I fell without moving. I screamed without sound. Then impact. It wasn't violent, more like being pressed between 2 palms. My body jarred and the world tilted. When I opened my eyes, I was on wet planks, coughing seawater from my lungs, my chest burning as though I'd been held under too long. Above me loomed a pier piling, slick with barnacles. The red beacon at the harbor's edge blinked through thinning fog. I was back on my own dock. The ferry was gone. No silhouette against the mist, no echo of its hull, no trace of its lights. Just the slap of real waves, the smell of diesel and kelp, the faint chatter of a radio from a trawler moored 3 slips down. I lay there for a long time, gasping, palms pressed to rough wood, telling myself over and over that I had made it, that I was here. Real. Breathing. Alive. But the dock beneath me was warm, not summer-warmed, not sun-baked. Midnight in October doesn't heat wood. Yet as I pushed myself up, the planks radiated that same ferry heat, the same uncomfortable fever glow I'd felt inside the cabins. It pulsed once, then faded, leaving only the chill of night air. I staggered back to the shack, clothes dripping, legs trembling. My landline sat where I'd left it. I grabbed the receiver and dialed Coast Guard. The line clicked once, then filled with static. My own voice answered, calm and bureaucratic. Passengers accounted. Ferry cleared. Proceed. I slammed the phone down so hard the plastic cracked. My hands shook, the skin under my nails raw where I'd gripped the helm. I wanted to run into town, wake someone, anyone, but what would I say? That a ferry with no name had come in, crewless but warm, filled with faceless passengers who whispered my name? That I had jumped into nothing and washed up back on my own pier? They'd call it fatigue. Harbor master gone a little stir-crazy in the fog. So I sat, soaked and shivering, staring at the radar screen. At 0512, a blip appeared. Bearing from the south. Speed, steady, impossible. Not a boat, not on that course, yet the machine painted it bright and unwavering. The intercom in the shack, long dead, unused for years, clicked once, twice, 3 times. My name whispered from nowhere. I ripped the cord from the wall, but the whisper hung in the air, not electronic at all. Just present. That was months ago. The ferry hasn't come back. Not in body, not in steel. But sometimes on fog nights I see warm lights blinking offshore where no channel runs. Sometimes I hear Willis's voice on the radio calling ETA on a route that hasn't existed in a decade. And sometimes when I walk the pier alone, the planks warm under my boots, as though the ferry still rests just out of sight, waiting. And every time the foghorn dies for a beat too long, I swear I hear the child's voice again, soft, urgent, cutting through the others. Jump.